The CEO stood frozen in the restaurant doorway, watching a maintenance worker sign to her daughter, and for the first time in 8 years she saw her child truly smile. What happens when a mother realizes a stranger speaks her daughter's language better than she ever could? When power, pride, and a corporate conspiracy collide on Christmas Eve, one woman must choose between the deal that will save her company and the truth that will save her soul. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey travels. The December wind cut through Manhattan like a knife made of ice and broken promises. Evelyn Cross stood on the corner of Fifth Avenue, her Armani coat doing little to shield her from the cold that seemed to seep through expensive fabric and settle somewhere deep in her chest. A cold that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with what waited for her inside the restaurant ahead. The Drake was the kind of establishment where reservations were made 6 months in advance, where the sommelier knew your preferences before you sat down, where deals worth hundreds of millions were sealed over $30 appetizers and $1,000 wines. Its windows glowed with warm amber light, and through the frosted glass, Evelyn could see the silhouettes of Manhattan's elite already gathering like well-dressed sharks circling wounded prey. And she was the prey tonight, though none of them knew it yet. "Mom?" The small hand tugging at her coat brought Evelyn back to the present. Luna stood beside her, 8 years old and already too accustomed to waiting for her mother's attention. Her daughter's dark eyes, so much like her father's had been, watched her with that particular expression children develop when they've learned not to expect too much. "Are we going in?" Luna's voice carried the particular cadence of someone who had been deaf since birth but worked tirelessly with speech therapists to bridge the gap between her silent world and the hearing one that surrounded her. The words came out slightly flattened, consonants softer than they should be, but perfectly understandable to anyone who bothered to listen. The problem was that most people didn't bother. Evelyn forced a smile and knelt down, adjusting the collar of Luna's velvet dress, navy blue, chosen because it wouldn't show stains and wouldn't draw too much attention. "Yes, sweetheart, but remember what we talked about." Luna's expression shuddered, becoming the careful blank mask that broke Evelyn's heart every time she saw it. The child nodded. "Use your words, Luna." "I'll be good," Luna said, her hands moving slightly at her sides, a suppressed gesture that Evelyn recognized but didn't understand. Her daughter was always moving her hands when she spoke, as if the words alone weren't enough, as if she needed another language to fully express herself, a language Evelyn had never learned. "I'll sit still. I won't bother anyone." "You're not a bother," Evelyn said automatically, but even as the words left her mouth, she felt the lie in them. Not because Luna was actually a bother, her daughter was remarkably well behaved, but because tonight, in that restaurant, with those investors, Luna would be seen as a complication, a liability, a weakness in Evelyn's armor. And Evelyn Cross, CEO of Crosstech Industries, couldn't afford to show weakness. Not tonight. Not when everything she'd built over the past 15 years was hanging by a thread so thin it might snap with a single wrong word, a single misstep, a single reason for the investors to doubt her leadership. She took Luna's hand and pushed through the restaurant's heavy doors. The wall of sound hit them immediately. The Drake's main dining room was a cathedral of wealth and noise. Crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across tables draped in white linen. The clink of silverware against fine china creating a constant percussion. Conversations overlapping in a symphony of self-importance. Laughter too loud to be genuine. The pop of champagne corks. The artificial warmth of people who smiled with their mouths but calculated with their eyes. Evelyn felt Luna's hand tighten in hers. She glanced down and saw her daughter's other hand moving toward her ear, toward the small, nearly invisible hearing aid that allowed Luna to navigate the hearing world, but turned environments like this into something overwhelming, painful even. The aids amplified everything, couldn't distinguish between the voice Luna needed to hear and the cacophony of background noise that made it impossible to focus on anything at all. "Luna, don't," Evelyn whispered, gently pulling her daughter's hand away. "You need to keep them in." Luna's eyes found hers, and in them, Evelyn saw a plea she didn't know how to answer. But before she could say anything else, a voice cut through the noise. "Evelyn, there you are. We were beginning to think you'd gotten lost." Richard Blackwood approached with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his life. At 63, he was chairman of Blackwood Ventures, the lead investor in Crosstech's Series D funding round, the round that should have closed 6 months ago but had been delayed again and again as rumors circulated about Crosstech's financial health, about Evelyn's leadership, about whether a woman could really run a major tech company in an industry still dominated by men who smiled while they sharpened their knives. Richard. Evelyn released Luna's hand to shake his, her grip firm, her smile perfectly calibrated. Traffic was worse than expected. Of course. Richard's eyes flicked down to Luna for just a moment, long enough for Evelyn to see the calculation, the slight downturn of his mouth. And you've brought your daughter. How, unexpected. It's Christmas Eve, Evelyn said, her voice carrying just enough edge to remind Richard that she was still CEO, still the person he supposedly wanted to invest in. Family time. Naturally. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Well, let's get you both seated. The others are already here, and we have quite a bit to discuss. He led them through the dining room, past tables where other dramas were playing out, a couple on what looked like an uncomfortable first date, a group of businessmen already several drinks deep, an elderly woman dining alone with a book. The Drake's maitre d' directed them to a private section in the back, partially separated from the main room by frosted glass panels etched with Art Deco designs. The table was set for 8. 5 seats were already occupied. Marcus Webb from Horizon Capital, Jennifer Cho representing Dynasty Investments, Robert Fitzgerald, Blackwood Ventures CFO, and 2 faces that made Evelyn's stomach drop despite years of corporate poker face training, David Chen and Patricia Morrison, members of her own board of directors. I wasn't aware this was a board meeting, Evelyn said carefully, her hand finding Luna's shoulder. Her daughter had gone very still beside her, the way she always did when she sensed tension she couldn't fully hear or understand. It's not, Patricia said smoothly. She was 55, elegant in the way of women who'd learned to weaponize their appearance, every strand of silver hair perfectly placed. Richard thought it might be helpful to have some board perspective during the investment discussions, given the complications. The complications. That's what they were calling it now. 6 months ago, someone had leaked information about Crosstech's upcoming AI product launch to a competitor. The result had been devastating. Their competitor had beaten them to market by 3 weeks, capturing the early adopter momentum that should have been Crosstech's. Revenue projections had plummeted. Stock price had dropped 30%. And suddenly the Series D funding that should have been a formality became a negotiation, then an interrogation, then something that felt increasingly like a corporate execution. Evelyn had spent 6 months trying to identify the source of the leak. 6 months of paranoia and late nights and examining every email, every conversation, every person who had access to the development roadmap. 6 months of coming up empty while the board grew increasingly restless and the investors grew increasingly cold. And now here they were, Christmas Eve, a dinner that was clearly about much more than investment terms. Shall we sit? Evelyn kept her voice neutral, guiding Luna to the chair beside where her own place card waited. She pulled out the chair for her daughter, then settled into her own seat, hyper-aware of how all eyes were on her, judging, measuring, looking for cracks in the foundation. Luna sat very straight, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes downcast. She'd mastered this pose over the past year, this way of making herself small and invisible. Evelyn hated it. Hated that her daughter had learned to disappear in rooms full of people. Hated that she'd never figured out how to make the world more accommodating instead of teaching Luna to accommodate it. A waiter appeared with menus and a wine list. Orders were placed with the kind of casual indifference that came from having too much money. Luna pointed at the pasta dish, and the waiter nodded without making eye contact, as if acknowledging her directly might somehow be improper. Once the waiter departed, Richard leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. Evelyn, let's not waste time with pleasantries. You know why we're here. I assumed it was to finalize the Series D terms, Evelyn said. The terms we agreed upon 6 months ago. The terms we discussed 6 months ago, before your company's valuation dropped by 1/3. This from Marcus Webb, a vulture capitalist in every sense of the word. The landscape has changed, Evelyn. Surely you understand that our investment thesis needs to change with it. Your investment thesis was based on Crosstech's technology, our team, and our market position, Evelyn countered. Those fundamentals haven't changed. We had a setback, yes, but a setback? Jennifer Cho's voice was sharp. Your competitor took your entire market segment. Your Q3 numbers were abysmal. Your projected Q4 numbers are even worse. This isn't a setback, Evelyn. This is a crisis. Luna shifted in her chair. Evelyn felt it more than saw it. That small movement that meant her daughter was uncomfortable, overwhelmed by the tension crackling across the table like electricity before a storm. She reached over and placed her hand over Luna's, squeezed gently. Luna didn't squeeze back. Every company faces challenges, Evelyn said, forcing herself to focus on the investors rather than her daughter's withdrawal. What matters is how leadership responds. I've restructured our development pipeline, accelerated our next product launch, and implemented security protocols to ensure nothing like the leak happens again. Have you identified who was responsible for the leak? This from Patricia Morrison, and there was something in her voice, something that made the hair on the back of Evelyn's neck stand up. Not yet, Evelyn admitted, but not yet. David Chen shook his head slowly. He was the newest board member, brought in 8 months ago as part of a diversity initiative that now felt like it might have been a Trojan horse. Evelyn, how can we trust your security protocols when you can't even identify the breach that cost the company hundreds of millions? I have a team working on it, Evelyn said tightly. These things take time. Time we don't have. Richard's voice had taken on a tone of finality that Evelyn recognized from 100 other negotiations, 100 other rooms where men had decided a woman's time was up. Evelyn, the investors have discussed this at length. We're prepared to move forward with the Series D funding, but under revised terms, and with a revised leadership structure. The room seemed to contract. Evelyn felt her pulse accelerate, felt the familiar cold spread through her chest, the cold that had become her constant companion over the past 6 months. What kind of revised leadership structure? You would remain as CEO in title, Patricia said, as if she were doing Evelyn a favor. But we'd bring in a chief operating officer who would oversee day-to-day operations and report directly to the board. Someone with a proven track record of someone to manage me, Evelyn interrupted flatly. Someone to make sure the emotional woman doesn't make any more mistakes. No one said anything about emotion, Richard said, but his tone suggested that's exactly what he was thinking. This is about corporate governance, about accountability, about ensuring that Crosstech has the leadership it needs to weather this crisis and emerge stronger. I built Crosstech from nothing. Evelyn's voice was quiet, but carried an edge that could cut glass. 15 years ago, I was coding in my apartment, pitching to investors who barely looked up from their phones. I grew this company to 800 employees, to $1 billion valuation, to technology that is genuinely innovative. And now you want to put someone over me because we had one bad quarter? One catastrophic quarter, Jennifer corrected. And let's be honest, Evelyn, there are concerns beyond just the numbers. Here it comes, Evelyn thought, the real reason for this dinner. What concerns? Jennifer glanced at Luna, then back at Evelyn, and in that glance was everything Evelyn had feared, everything she'd been fighting against since the day Luna was born. You're a single mother with a special needs child, Jennifer said, her voice taking on a tone of false sympathy that was worse than outright hostility. No one doubts your dedication, but there are questions about whether you can give Crosstech the attention it needs during this critical period, whether your personal obligations might be affecting your judgment. The cold in Evelyn's chest turned to ice, then to fire. My daughter, she said carefully, each word precisely enunciated, has nothing to do with my ability to lead this company. Of course not, David agreed too quickly. But perception matters, Evelyn. And the perception is that you're distracted, that you're stretched too thin, that maybe it's time to step back, at least partially, and let others help carry the load. Luna tugged at Evelyn's sleeve. When Evelyn looked down, her daughter's face was pale, her eyes wide. Mom? She said quietly. Can I go to the bathroom? Not right now, sweetheart, Evelyn said, trying to soften her voice even as her entire world tilted on its axis. Just a few more minutes. But Mom, Luna, please, just sit still. Luna's face crumpled for just a second, a flash of hurt that she quickly buried under that careful blank mask. She pulled her hand away from Evelyn's and folded both hands in her lap again, staring down at the table. Evelyn felt the loss of that contact like a physical pain, but she couldn't deal with it now. Not when everything was falling apart. Not when she needed every ounce of focus to fight for what she'd built. "Let me be clear," she said, turning her attention back to the investors. "I will not accept a COO position over me. I will not accept any leadership structure that undermines my authority as CEO. If those are your terms, then we don't have a deal." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. "Evelyn," Richard said finally, "be reasonable. You're not in a position to dictate terms here. Without this funding, Crosstech will be out of money in 6 months. Your options are to accept our structure or watch your company die." "There are other investors," Evelyn said, but even she could hear how hollow it sounded. They'd tried other investors. Every door in Silicon Valley had closed when word got out about their troubles. In this industry, failure was contagious, and no one wanted to catch it. "Are there?" Patricia's smile was cold. "Because, from what I understand, you've exhausted most of your options. This is the deal on the table, Evelyn. Take it or leave it, and explain to your 800 employees why their stock options just became worthless." Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the lights flickered. It was brief, barely a second, but everyone noticed. Conversations around them stuttered. The ambient noise of the restaurant dropped for a moment, then resumed. "Probably just the storm," Robert Fitzgerald said, glancing toward the windows where snow had begun to fall harder, wind driving it nearly horizontal against the glass. But Evelyn felt Luna stiffen beside her. Her daughter's hands moved to her ears, and this time Evelyn didn't stop her. Luna's face had gone from pale to almost gray, her breathing rapid and shallow. "Luna? What's wrong?" "The sound," Luna said, her voice strained in the way it got when her hearing aids were malfunctioning. It hurts, Mom. Something's wrong with..." The lights flickered again, longer this time, and then went out completely. The restaurant plunged into darkness. For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence, the kind of shocked quiet that follows when the world suddenly changes its rules. Then came the sounds of confusion, someone's nervous laugh, a glass being knocked over, chairs scraping as people stood. Emergency lights kicked in, casting everything in a dim, eerie red glow that made faces look ghostly and shadows dance across walls. Luna's hands were pressed hard against her ears now, her eyes squeezed shut. Evelyn could see her daughter's mouth moving, but couldn't hear what she was saying over the rising tide of voices, alarm, confusion, a few attempts at humor masking real fear. "Luna, it's okay," Evelyn said, pulling her daughter close. "It's just a power outage. It's fine." But Luna was shaking her head, her whole body trembling. "No, Mom, my aides, something's wrong with them. There's this noise, this horrible..." And then Luna pulled away from Evelyn and bolted. She moved fast, pushing through the crowd of people now standing around their tables, past concerned waiters trying to restore order, heading toward what Evelyn realized was a service door partially hidden behind one of the frosted glass panels. "Luna!" Evelyn stood, started to follow, but Richard's hand caught her arm. "Evelyn, we need to..." "My daughter," she said sharply, pulling free. "Excuse me." She heard Patricia's voice behind her, something about exactly what we're talking about. But Evelyn was already moving, following the small figure in the navy blue dress as Luna disappeared through the service door into whatever lay beyond. The service corridor was dimmer than the dining room, lit only by a few emergency lights placed at intervals along the wall. It smelled like industrial cleaning supplies, and the kind of food that's meant to be consumed quickly in employee break rooms. The sounds of the restaurant were muted here, replaced by the hum of commercial refrigerators and the distant clatter of a kitchen in controlled chaos. Evelyn found Luna 20 feet down the corridor, pressed against the wall, both hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. "Sweetheart." Evelyn knelt in front of her daughter, gently touching her shoulder. "Talk to me. What's wrong with your hearing aids?" "It's like screaming," Luna managed, her voice rough with tears. "Like static and screaming, and it won't stop, and I tried to make it stop, but..." Okay, let's take them out." Evelyn's hand shook slightly as she reached for the nearly invisible devices. She'd watched the audiologist demonstrate this 100 times, but had rarely done it herself. Luna usually managed her own hearing aids, proud of her independence even at 8 years old. But tonight, Luna's hands were trembling too much. Evelyn carefully removed first one hearing aid, then the other. Luna's shoulders sagged with relief as soon as they were out, though tears continued to track down her cheeks. "Better?" Evelyn asked, then remembered. Without the aids, Luna couldn't hear her at all. She should sign. She knew she should sign. But Evelyn had never learned more than a few basic phrases, always telling herself she'd take lessons next month, next quarter, once things settled down at work. There had always been an excuse, always something more urgent, and Luna had learned to lip read and speak so well that it had been easy to tell herself that sign language wasn't really necessary. Now, looking at her daughter's tear-stained face in the red emergency lighting, Evelyn felt the full weight of that failure. She settled for touching Luna's face gently, trying to convey through touch what she couldn't through words. Luna leaned into her mother's hand for just a moment, then pulled back, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry," Luna said, her voice taking on the too loud quality it got when she couldn't hear herself. "I'm sorry I ran away. I'm sorry I ruined your dinner." "You didn't ruin anything," Evelyn said, forgetting again that Luna couldn't hear her. She tried to make her face say what her words couldn't, that none of this was Luna's fault, that Evelyn loved her, that, "Is everything all right here?" Evelyn turned to find a man standing a few feet away, wearing the kind of generic utility uniform that marked him as building maintenance or possibly security. He was in his mid-30s, tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, observant eyes that took in the scene with what looked like genuine concern rather than nosiness. "We're fine," Evelyn said curtly, standing and positioning herself slightly between the man and Luna. "Just needed a moment away from the crowd." The man nodded slowly, but his eyes had moved to Luna, taking in the hearing aids in Evelyn's hand, the tear tracks on her daughter's face. And then his hands moved. He signed something, smooth, fluid, natural. Evelyn had no idea what he'd said, but she saw Luna's eyes widen, saw her daughter straighten slightly. Luna's hands moved in response, faster than Evelyn had ever seen them move when she was trying to communicate with her mother. A whole conversation in gestures that Evelyn couldn't understand, couldn't participate in. The man smiled and signed something else that made Luna's face brighten just slightly. Then he knelt down to Luna's level and continued the conversation in sign language, occasionally glancing up at Evelyn as if to include her, though they both knew she was excluded by her own ignorance. Evelyn watched her daughter come back to life, watched the tension leave Luna's shoulders, watched her respond with increasing animation, watched her almost smile become something more genuine, and felt something twist in her chest that might have been gratitude, or might have been jealousy, or might have been shame. After a minute, the man stood and addressed Evelyn directly, his voice gentle, but not condescending. "She says the power fluctuation caused feedback in her hearing aids, made them emit a high-pitched sound that was painful." "Who are you?" Evelyn asked. "Caleb Moore. I work maintenance for the building." He paused, then added, "My son is deaf. When I saw your daughter having trouble, I thought maybe I could help." Luna tugged at Caleb's sleeve and signed something rapidly. He listened, watched, then nodded and signed back before turning to Evelyn. "She wants to know if you're angry with her." The twist in Evelyn's chest became a sharp pain. "No, God, no. Luna?" She looked down at her daughter, tried to make her face convey everything she felt. "I'm not angry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you were in pain and I didn't eat." She didn't finish the sentence, but they all knew what she meant. She didn't understand. She didn't know what Luna needed. She didn't speak her own daughter's language. Caleb signed something to Luna, who nodded and then, hesitantly, reached out to take Evelyn's hand. "The power should be back soon," Caleb said, "but you might want to keep those hearing aids out until the system stabilizes. The fluctuations could happen again." "What's causing it?" Evelyn asked. "A storm wouldn't do this." Something flickered across Caleb's face, so quick that Evelyn almost missed it. "Could be a lot of things. Old building, old wiring. I'm sure the emergency crew will figure it out." He was lying, or at least not telling the whole truth. Evelyn had spent 15 years reading people across negotiating tables. and she knew what omission looked like. But before she could press him, voices echoed down the corridor, someone from the restaurant calling her name. "Miss Cross? Evelyn Cross?" Evelyn turned to see one of the Drake's managers hurrying toward them, looking harried. "Miss Cross, your party is asking for you. The power's coming back on, and they'd like to continue your discussion." Of course they would. The investors wouldn't let a little thing like a power outage derail their corporate coup. Evelyn looked down at Luna, then at the hearing aids in her hand, then back at Caleb. "Can she stay here with you? Just for a few more minutes?" She saw the surprise on Caleb's face, followed quickly by something that might have been respect. "Of course. Noah, my son, should be finishing up his homework in the break room. Luna would be welcome to wait with us." Luna signed something, and Caleb translated. "She says she'll be okay. She wants you to go back to your dinner." Such a good girl. Such a well-trained daughter. Always accommodating, always making herself small, always putting her mother's needs first, because that's what she'd learned to do. Evelyn knelt again, took both of Luna's hands in hers. "I'll be back as soon as I can. I promise." Luna nodded, but there was something in her eyes. A wariness, a learned doubt. How many times had Evelyn made promises she couldn't quite keep? How many times had "as soon as I can" stretched into hours? As Evelyn stood and turned to follow the manager back toward the dining room, she looked over her shoulder one last time. Caleb had already signed something that made Luna smile. Not the careful, controlled smile she gave adults who made her nervous, but a real smile, the kind Evelyn couldn't remember seeing in months. A stranger could make her daughter smile with just a few gestures. A maintenance worker she'd known for 5 minutes could communicate more in sign language than Evelyn had managed in 8 years. The cold in her chest became something else, something that felt like grief for all the conversations she'd never had, all the moments of connection she'd missed because she'd been too busy, too focused on building her company, too convinced that Luna's speaking and lip reading meant that sign language could wait. The lights flickered once more as she re-entered the dining room, then steadied. The chandeliers blazed back to full brightness, making everyone squint. Conversations resumed with nervous laughter, relief palpable in the air. Evelyn returned to her table, where the investors sat with expressions ranging from impatience to poorly concealed irritation. "Everything all right?" Richard asked, his tone suggesting he didn't particularly care about the answer. "Fine," Evelyn said shortly, settling back into her chair. "Where were we?" "We were discussing the proposed leadership changes," Patricia said. "Evelyn, the board has already voted on this. 4-3 in favor of bringing in a COO. This is happening whether you agree to stay on as CEO or not. The question is whether you'll be part of Crosstech's future or not." 4-3. That meant that 3 board members had voted in her favor, probably the ones who'd made their fortunes in tech and remembered what it was like to build something from nothing. But 4 had voted against her, and in corporate governance, 4 beat 3 every time. "Who voted against me?" Evelyn asked quietly. Patricia had the grace to look uncomfortable, but David answered without hesitation. "Does it matter? The vote is what it is." It mattered. It mattered because Crosstech was hers, not in terms of equity, which had been diluted over several funding rounds, but in terms of vision, heart, soul. She'd built it. She'd grown it. She'd made every major decision for 15 years, and now they wanted to tell her she wasn't capable of managing what she'd created. The waiter appeared with their appetizers, a welcome interruption that gave everyone an excuse to look away from the tension crackling across the table. Evelyn stared down at some kind of artfully arranged fish that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries and felt her stomach turn. She thought about Luna in that service corridor, about the way her daughter's face had lit up when someone finally spoke her language, about how Evelyn had failed at the one thing that should have mattered most. "I need to see the proposed terms," she heard herself say. "The complete proposed structure, reporting lines, everything." Richard's smile was victorious. "Of course. Robert has the documents prepared." Robert Fitzgerald pulled a folder from the briefcase beside his chair and slid it across the table. "It's all laid out here. The COO would report to the board. You would report to the COO on operational matters but retain strategic oversight. All major decisions would require board approval, It's a very standard structure for companies in transition. Evelyn opened the folder and began to read, though the words seemed to swim in front of her eyes. Standard structure. Companies in transition. All the corporate euphemisms for "we don't trust you anymore." She was halfway through the second page when the lights flickered again. This time, the flicker lasted longer. 3 seconds, 4, 5. And when they came back on, they weren't quite as bright. The chandeliers buzzed faintly, a sound that shouldn't have been there. Around the restaurant, people were looking up nervously. The manager who'd fetched Evelyn earlier was speaking urgently into a phone near the host stand. "This is getting ridiculous," Jennifer muttered. "What kind of establishment can't keep their power on?" But Evelyn was thinking about what Caleb had said, or rather, what he hadn't said. The careful omission when she'd asked about the cause. The flicker of something in his eyes. "Old building, old wiring," he'd said. But the Drake had been fully renovated 3 years ago. She knew because she'd attended the reopening gala. Everything had been brought up to code, state-of-the-art systems throughout. So what was really happening? The lights stabilized again, but Evelyn found herself unable to focus on the documents in front of her. Her mind kept drifting to Luna, hoping her daughter was okay, hoping the hearing aid feedback hadn't started again, hoping that a stranger was taking better care of her child than she had. "Evelyn?" Patricia's voice cut through her thoughts. "Did you have questions about the structure?" Evelyn looked up from documents she hadn't been reading, at faces that barely bothered to hide their triumph, at the future they'd planned for her company without her real input. And she realized something that should have been obvious from the moment she walked through the Drake's doors. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an ambush. The power outage had just delayed the execution. The question was whether she'd fight back or accept the blade. Before she could answer, before she could decide which version of herself she was going to be tonight, the restaurant's sound system emitted a screech of feedback that made everyone wince. Conversation stopped. Silverware clattered as hands moved to cover ears. And then, over the speakers, a voice. Distorted, artificial, clearly using some kind of voice modifier. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please. This establishment is experiencing a technical difficulty. For your safety, we ask that you remain in your seats and remain calm. The situation is under control." The voice cut off. The sound system went silent. In the wake of that announcement, the restaurant erupted in nervous chatter, confusion, a few demands for explanations from staff who clearly had none to give. But Evelyn wasn't listening to any of that. She was staring at the folder in front of her, at the documents that outlined her carefully planned diminishment, thinking about power outages that didn't make sense and announcements that sounded more like warnings than reassurances. Something was wrong. Something beyond the investor's coup, beyond the board's vote, beyond her daughter crying in a service corridor. Something was very, very wrong. And Evelyn Cross had spent 15 years of her life learning to trust her instincts when something felt off. She closed the folder and stood. "Where are you going?" Richard's voice had an edge of command that suggested he thought he already had the right to question her movements. "To check on my daughter," Evelyn said evenly, "and to find out what's really going on." She didn't wait for permission. Didn't wait to see if they'd try to stop her. She simply walked away from the table, away from the documents that would sign away her authority, away from people who'd decided she was too weak to lead. Walked toward the service corridor where her daughter waited with a stranger who could speak her language, and tried to ignore the feeling in her gut that said tonight was about to get much worse before it got better. The service corridor felt colder the second time Evelyn walked through it, or maybe that was just the fear crystallizing in her veins. The emergency lights cast everything in shades of red and shadow, making the familiar geometry of walls and doorways seem alien, threatening. Behind her, she could hear the rising tide of voices from the dining room, confusion bleeding into panic as people realized that whatever was happening wasn't being resolved as quickly as promised. She found Luna exactly where she'd left her, but the scene had shifted in ways that made Evelyn's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Her daughter sat cross-legged on the floor next to a boy who looked about 10, both of them bent over what appeared to be a homework assignment spread across a clipboard. The boy's hands moved in fluid conversation, and Luna responded with equal fluency, her face animated in a way Evelyn rarely saw anymore. Caleb stood a few feet away, examining an electrical panel on the wall with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he was seeing more than just circuits and breakers. "Caleb!" Evelyn's voice came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with the adrenaline that came from not understanding what was happening in her own life. "What's going on?" That announcement. He turned, and she saw something in his expression that confirmed her worst suspicions. He knew something he hadn't shared when they'd first met. "Noah, keep working on that math problem," Caleb said to the boy, his hands moving as he spoke so his son could follow both the verbal and signed instruction. Then he gestured for Evelyn to step a few feet away, out of the children's earshot. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled. "How much do you know about your dinner companions?" The question was so unexpected that Evelyn felt her carefully maintained composure crack. "Excuse me? The people you're meeting with, how well do you trust them?" "I don't see how that's any of your business," Evelyn said, but even as the words left her mouth, she was remembering the documents in that folder, the 4-3 vote, the careful way Patricia and David had orchestrated this entire evening. "Why are you asking?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "Because someone in that dining room is deliberately sabotaging the Drake's electrical and network systems. This isn't a power outage. It's an attack." The words should have sounded absurd, the paranoid fantasy of someone who'd watched too many thrillers. But Evelyn had built a career on reading people, on knowing when someone was lying and when they were telling an uncomfortable truth. And Caleb Moore wasn't lying. "How do you know?" she asked quietly. "Because I helped design the building's security systems when they renovated 3 years ago. I know every circuit, every backup, every failsafe." What's happening tonight isn't random failure. Someone is systematically disabling security protocols while making it look like electrical problems. He paused, studying her face. "You're Evelyn Cross, Crosstech Industries. I recognized you when I saw you earlier, but I didn't want to say anything in front of your daughter. Then why are you telling me now?" "Because whatever's about to happen, you need to know it's deliberate. And you need to decide whether the people you're meeting with tonight might have a reason to want you compromised." The word hung in the air between them like a threat. Compromised. Not just the business kind where your market position weakened or your stock price dropped. The kind where something genuinely dangerous was unfolding. Evelyn thought about the folder on the table, the COO position that had already been voted on before she'd even arrived. The way Patricia and David had looked at her, not with the discomfort of board members delivering bad news, but with something that might have been anticipation. "You think this is connected to my meeting," she said slowly. "You think someone I'm dining with is behind this. I think it's suspicious that on the same night you're having what looks like a very tense business dinner, someone is systematically taking down every security camera in this building while being careful to keep enough power running that no one evacuates." Caleb's eyes were steady on hers. "I think whoever's doing this wants everyone to stay exactly where they are while something else unfolds." A crash from the dining room made them both turn. Through the partially open service door, Evelyn could see chaos beginning to take hold. People standing, voices raised, the manager trying to maintain order while clearly having no idea what to tell anyone. "Mom?" Luna's voice, too loud without her hearing aids to modulate volume. Evelyn turned to find her daughter standing, Noah beside her, both children's faces tight with fear. Luna's hands moved rapidly, and Caleb translated without being asked. "She wants to know if we're in danger. She says Noah is scared, and she's scared too." The naked truth of it, the admission that her always accommodating daughter was frightened, cut through every corporate instinct Evelyn had cultivated over 15 years. This wasn't about board votes or investor confidence or maintaining the appearance of control. This was about her child, frightened and asking a question that deserved an honest answer. "I don't know," Evelyn said, and watched Caleb sign her words to Luna. "But we're going to figure it out." Luna's face didn't relax, but she nodded with the kind of solemn acceptance that children develop when the adults in their life have been honest with them about hard things. She turned to Noah and signed something that made the boy's shoulders straighten slightly, some reassurance passing between them in a language Evelyn still couldn't speak. The lights flickered again, longer this time, a full 10 seconds of darkness before the emergency lighting kicked back in. And in that darkness, Evelyn heard something from the dining room that made her blood run cold. A scream, high, sharp, terrified. She was moving before conscious thought caught up with instinct, pushing back through the service door into the dining room where people were now standing in clusters, some backing toward exits, others frozen in place. The red emergency lighting made everything look like a scene from a nightmare, familiar faces rendered strange and threatening by shadow and fear. "What happened?" Evelyn demanded of the nearest waiter, a young man whose name tag read James and whose face had gone pale. "Someone's phone." James gestured toward a table near the windows where a woman in an emerald dress stood staring at her device with an expression of absolute horror. "She got a message, something about, I don't know, she just screamed." Evelyn pushed through the crowd toward the woman, aware of Caleb following behind her, his presence solid and somehow reassuring. When she reached the table, the woman looked up, her carefully applied makeup streaking with tears. "They have my daughter," the woman whispered. "They sent me a picture. My daughter at her dorm room. They know where she is. They said..." Her voice broke. "They said if I try to leave or call anyone, they'll..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. The threat was clear enough. Around them, other phones were beginning to chirp with incoming messages. Evelyn watched as face after face went from confusion to shock to fear. Whatever was happening wasn't random. It was targeted, coordinated. Her own phone buzzed in her clutch. She pulled it out with hands that had started to shake despite every effort to remain calm. The message had no sender ID, just a photo and 2 lines of text. The photo was of Luna, taken within the last 5 minutes based on what her daughter was wearing, taken in the service corridor where Evelyn had just left her. The angle suggested it had been captured by a security camera. Below the photo, "Stay in the dining room. Say nothing to security. Wait for instructions. Your daughter's safety depends on your cooperation." The world contracted to that single image, that single threat. Every protective instinct Evelyn had developed over 8 years of single motherhood crystallized into pure rage, hot and sharp enough to cut. "Luna," she breathed. Caleb was already moving, reading the situation from her expression. "Noah and Luna. Someone's watching them." As Evelyn shoved the phone toward him, not caring about privacy or propriety or anything except getting to her daughter. "They sent me this. They're threatening her." Caleb's face went hard in a way that transformed him from a maintenance worker into something far more dangerous. "The cameras are compromised. I should have moved them immediately. I should have... We need to get to them now." Evelyn was already pushing back toward the service corridor, but Caleb caught her arm. "Wait. If whoever's doing this is watching the cameras, they'll see you heading back there. They might..." He stopped, jaw working as he calculated risks. "We need to be smart about this. My daughter is with my son, and I will not let anything happen to either of them." The conviction in his voice was absolute, but rushing in without a plan could make things worse. He was right. Evelyn knew he was right, but every instinct was screaming at her to run to Luna, to put herself between her daughter and whatever threat was unfolding. The restaurant's sound system crackled to life again, that same distorted voice cutting through the rising panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, remain calm. A situation is developing that requires your cooperation. For the safety of everyone in this establishment, including your loved ones who may be elsewhere in the building, please return to your tables and await further instructions. Any attempt to leave or contact outside authorities will result in consequences." The last word echoed through the sudden silence that followed. Consequences. Not injuries. Not harm. Consequences. Carefully chosen to be threatening while remaining vague enough to let everyone's imagination fill in the worst possibilities. People were crying now. A man near the bar had his phone pressed to his ear, trying to call 911, but from his expression, Evelyn guessed the call wasn't going through. Another woman was trying to push toward the exit, but 2 men who Evelyn suddenly realized looked more like security than fellow diners were blocking her path without making it obvious they were blocking her path. This was planned. Meticulously planned. Someone had thought through every detail, every response, every way to control a room full of wealthy, powerful people who were accustomed to being in control themselves. Evelyn turned back to her table where the investors and board members sat with varying expressions of shock and outrage. Richard was on his phone, face red with fury as he apparently discovered the same thing everyone else had. No calls were going out. Patricia looked pale but composed, her hands folded on the table as if she were simply waiting for a delayed meeting to begin. David and Robert were conferring in whispers, while Jennifer Cho sat very still, staring at her own phone with an expression Evelyn couldn't quite read. Marcus Webb caught her eye and gestured her over with the kind of imperious wave that suggested he'd forgotten they were all hostages and had reverted to thinking of himself as someone who gave orders others followed. "This is unacceptable," Marcus said as soon as Evelyn was within earshot. "Whatever game someone's playing, but This isn't a game." Evelyn's voice came out colder than she'd intended. "Someone is threatening people's families, including my daughter." Patricia's head snapped up. "What?" "Luna is being watched by whoever is doing this. They sent me her photo." Evelyn pulled out her phone again, showed them the image and threat. "Someone has access to all the security cameras. Someone knows exactly who's here and how to threaten them." "Then we need to contact the police," Richard said, but even he didn't sound convinced it would be that simple. "Phones aren't working," Jennifer said quietly. She held up her own device, showing a screen full of failed call attempts. "I've tried every number I have. Nothing goes through. Internet is down too. We're completely cut off." Caleb appeared at Evelyn's shoulder, moving with the kind of quiet authority that made even Marcus Webb pause before objecting to the presence of someone in a utility uniform at their table. "The landlines are down too. Every external communication system has been disabled. Whoever planned this knew exactly how this building's infrastructure works." "Who are you?" Patricia demanded. "Someone who designed the security systems you're all relying on right now," Caleb said evenly. "And someone who can tell you that this level of access, this level of control, it didn't come from outside. Someone inside this building, probably someone in this room, gave the attackers everything they needed." The silence that followed was absolute. Evelyn watched faces around the table, looking for tells, for guilty glances, for anything that might indicate who among them had betrayed everyone else. But these were people who'd built careers on poker faces, in careful deception. If one of them was responsible, they weren't going to reveal it easily. "That's absurd," David said finally. "Why would anyone here cooperate with whatever this is? We're all victims." "Are we?" Caleb's gaze moved around the table, assessing each person with the kind of attention that made Evelyn revise her estimation of who and what he was. Not just building maintenance, something more. Someone who knew how to read situations most people would miss. "Because from what I can see, some of you seem less surprised than others. Some of you had your phones in your hands before the announcement, as if you were expecting something." His eyes landed on Jennifer Cho, who'd been staring at her phone with that unreadable expression. "Ms. Cho, what did your message say?" Jennifer's carefully maintained composure cracked. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Your phone. You've been staring at it for the past 3 minutes. Not trying to call anyone, not texting, just staring. What are you looking at?" For a long moment, Evelyn thought Jennifer would refuse to answer. But then something in her face shifted. Resignation, maybe, or the calculation that denial would only make things worse. She turned her phone toward them. On the screen was a message similar to the one Evelyn had received, but with one crucial difference. Status: Phase 2 initiated. Maintain position. Asset extraction in progress. Asset extraction, Evelyn repeated slowly. The corporate euphemism sounded obscene in the context of hostages and threats. "What assets? What are you involved in, Jennifer?" "Nothing. I received this by mistake, I think. I don't know what it means." But Jennifer's voice lacked conviction, and her hands trembled slightly as she pulled her phone back. Richard leaned forward, his earlier fury giving way to something more calculating. "Jennifer, if you know something about what's happening here—" "I don't know anything." Jennifer's voice rose, drawing attention from nearby tables. She seemed to realize it and lowered her tone. "I got a message. That's all. I have no idea who sent it or what it means." "Then why didn't you show it to anyone immediately?" Patricia asked. "Why sit there staring at it if you thought it was some kind of mistake?" Jennifer opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the lights went out again. This time they stayed out longer. 30 seconds, 40. A full minute of darkness broken only by the red emergency lighting that seemed to grow dimmer with each passing second. In that darkness, Evelyn heard movement. Not the confused shuffling of frightened people, but purposeful footsteps. Multiple sets, coming from different directions. "Everyone stay where you are," a new voice called out. Male, authoritative, but not the distorted voice from the speakers. This was someone in the room with them. "Building security. We're working to resolve the situation. Remain calm." And the voice cut off with a grunt of pain and the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. People screamed. Someone near Evelyn knocked over a chair trying to move away from whatever had just happened. When the emergency lights brightened again, Evelyn saw what everyone else saw. One of the Drake's actual security guards unconscious on the floor, and standing over him were three men in dark tactical gear that looked nothing like the restaurant's usual staffing. The men wore masks, the kind that covered everything but the eyes, the kind that turned human beings into anonymous threats. One of them held up a hand, and the room fell silent with the weight of their collective fear. "Ladies and gentlemen," the masked man said, his voice calm and almost friendly, "I apologize for the disruption to your evening. This situation can be resolved quickly and painlessly if everyone cooperates. We're looking for something specific. Once we have it, we'll be gone, and you'll all be free to continue your very important lives." "What do you want?" Richard's voice had lost all its earlier authority, replaced by the careful tone of someone who'd realized they weren't in control of anything. "We want access to Crosstech Industries' secure server network. Specifically, we want the encryption keys for Project Meridian." The masked man's eyes found Evelyn across the room. "Ms. Cross, I believe you have those keys. You're going to give them to us." Project Meridian. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. That was the classified AI development project, the one that had been leaked 6 months ago, except not all of it had been leaked. They'd lost the product roadmap, the market strategy, but the actual proprietary code had remained secure behind encryption that only 3 people in the world had the keys to unlock. Evelyn was one of those 3 people. "I don't carry encryption keys in my purse," Evelyn said, trying to keep her voice steady even as her mind raced through implications and possibilities. "They're stored securely, off-site. You'd need to access your phone, which has a secure app that can generate temporary access codes." The masked man's voice remained pleasant, which somehow made him more terrifying than if he'd been shouting threats. "We know how your security protocols work, Ms. Cross. We know exactly what you can access from here, so let's not waste time pretending you can't give us what we want." He was right. The app existed precisely for emergency situations where she needed access to the project from remote locations. But the temporary codes it generated would only work for 30 minutes, and only from her authenticated device. If she gave them what they wanted, they'd have complete access to 3 years of development work worth hundreds of millions of dollars. If she refused, what would they do? What would they do to the people in this room? What would they do to Luna? "My daughter," Evelyn said, her voice cracking slightly on the words. "Let me see my daughter. Let me know she's safe, and I'll give you what you want." The masked man tilted his head, considering. "Your daughter is perfectly safe, Ms. Cross. She's exactly where you left her, being watched by someone who will ensure no harm comes to her as long as you cooperate." He paused. "But you don't trust me, do you? You want proof." He pulled out a radio and spoke into it in a language Evelyn didn't recognize. A moment later, the restaurant's speakers crackled to life. Not with the distorted voice from earlier, but with something that made Evelyn's heart stop. Luna's voice. Scared, high-pitched, calling for her mother. "Mom? Mom, where are you? There's someone here, and Noah said we have to be quiet, but I'm scared. Mom?" Evelyn was moving before she'd consciously decided to move, but Caleb caught her arm again, his grip firm enough to stop her forward momentum. "Wait," he said quietly. "That's a recording. Listen to the background. There's no ambient sound, no room noise. They recorded her earlier, and they're playing it back to manipulate you." He was right. Now that he'd pointed it out, Evelyn could hear it. The slight flatness that came from recorded audio, the lack of natural echo that should have been there if Luna was speaking in real time in an actual space. But that meant someone had been close enough to her daughter to record her voice. Someone had been close enough to frighten her into calling for help. The rage Evelyn had felt earlier crystallized into something cold and clear and absolutely lethal. "You're playing games," she said to the masked man. You're trying to manipulate me. But here's what you don't understand about mothers. Every game you play, every threat you make against my child, makes me less likely to give you what you want, not more." The masked man's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's very brave, Ms. Cross, but also very stupid. You're not in a position to. Neither are you." The voice came from behind the masked men, and everyone turned to see Caleb stepping forward, his earlier careful neutrality replaced by something that made the armed men shift their weight slightly, preparing for a threat. "Because I know who sent you, I know who's paying you, and I know that the encrypted files you're trying to steal will be worthless in about—" He glanced at his watch. 15 minutes when the backup security protocols I initiated 10 minutes ago complete their cycle. The masked man's hand moved toward his weapon, but Caleb continued, his voice level and utterly confident. "I helped design Crosstech's security architecture 2 years ago, consulting contract. I know every backdoor, every failsafe, every protocol. And when I saw the security cameras being compromised, I activated a remote wipe sequence for all encryption keys in Crosstech's system. By the time you force Ms. Cross to generate those temporary codes, there won't be anything left to decrypt." Evelyn stared at him. She'd never hired anyone named Caleb Moore to work on security architecture. She'd have remembered, which meant he was either lying, bluffing to buy them time, or he'd been involved with Crosstech under a different name for reasons he hadn't shared. Either way, he'd just made himself a target. The masked man studied Caleb for a long moment, then spoke into his radio again. This time, Evelyn caught a few words that sounded like codes, instructions. Whatever he was saying, it was changing the situation. "Interesting," the masked man said finally. "You're Caleb Moore, the former NSA contractor who disappeared 3 years ago after a rather spectacular falling out with your employers, the one who's supposed to be dead." Evelyn's mind reeled. NSA, dead. The man who'd been signing with her daughter, who worked maintenance in a Manhattan restaurant, had a past that was apparently more complicated than anything she'd imagined. "I got better," Caleb said dryly. "And I'm telling you that whatever you're planning, whatever you think you're going to accomplish here, it's already falling apart. So maybe it's time to cut your losses and leave before this turns into something you can't walk away from." For a long moment, no one moved. The entire dining room held its breath, waiting to see how this standoff would resolve. Then the masked man smiled. Evelyn could see it in his eyes, the way they crinkled at the corners. "You're bluffing," he said. "There's no remote wipe sequence. That's not how Crosstech security works. I've seen the architecture myself. You're trying to buy time." "Maybe," Caleb agreed. "Or maybe I'm telling the truth and you're about to lose everything you came here for. Want to risk it?" The silence stretched out, tension building like pressure behind a dam. Evelyn could feel her own heartbeat, loud and fast, counting down seconds that felt like hours. The masked man raised his radio again, but before he could speak into it, the lights flickered one more time. And then, something unexpected happened. Every phone in the room started ringing at once, not buzzing with texts or chirping with notifications, actually ringing, loud and shrill and impossible to ignore. People grabbed their devices, confusion mixing with hope that maybe the communications blackout had ended. But when they answered, their expressions changed from hope to horror. Because on every screen was the same image, security camera footage showing 2 children, Luna and Noah, sitting in what looked like a storage room, unaware they were being filmed, unaware that their faces were now being broadcast to their parents and every other phone in the room. And in the corner of each screen, a countdown timer, 10 at-walk minutes and ticking down. The masked man's voice carried across the room, cutting through the rising panic. "That's how long you have, Ms. Cross. 10 minutes to give us what we want, or we will demonstrate that we are very serious about consequences." Evelyn looked at the screen, at her daughter's face, at Luna signing something to Noah that Evelyn couldn't understand but could see was trying to be brave, trying to comfort the other boy, even though she was frightened too. And she made a decision that would change everything that came after. "All right," she said quietly. "You win. I'll give you the encryption keys." The words left Evelyn's mouth before she'd fully processed what agreeing would mean. She watched the masked man's shoulders relax slightly, satisfaction evident even through the tactical gear and anonymity. He'd won, or thought he had, and that confidence would be either his greatest strength or his fatal weakness. A wise choice, Ms. Cross, he said, gesturing toward her with the kind of casual authority that suggested he'd done this before. Please, take out your phone. Open the secure application. Generate the temporary access codes. Evelyn's hand moved to her clutch, fingers closing around her phone. The screen still showed Luna's face, the countdown timer now reading 9:47. Every second that ticked away felt like a small death, a piece of her daughter's safety slipping through her fingers. But as she pulled the phone out, Caleb's voice cut through the moment with quiet intensity. Don't do it. Every head in the room turned toward him. The masked man's hand moved toward his weapon, but Caleb didn't flinch. He stood there with the kind of stillness that came from someone who'd faced worse threats and survived them. Excuse me? The masked man said softly. She shouldn't give you the codes, Caleb continued, his eyes on Evelyn now rather than their captors. Because once you have what you want, there's no reason to keep anyone here alive. You've shown your faces, well, your eyes, and voices can be analyzed. You've left traces. The only way you walk away clean is if no one can identify you afterward. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. People who'd been crying quietly began to sob in earnest. A man near the bar made a sound that might have been a prayer or might have been a curse. The truth of what Caleb had said settled over everyone like a burial shroud. That's a very dramatic interpretation, the masked man said, but something in his voice had changed, a flatness that suggested Caleb had touched on an uncomfortable truth. We're professionals. We have no interest in unnecessary violence. We came for data, not bloodshed. Then why disable all the communications, Caleb pressed? Why trap everyone here? Why not just grab Evelyn in the parking lot, force her to give you the codes at gunpoint? It would have been simpler, cleaner, far less exposure. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Unless the point wasn't just getting the codes, unless there's something else you need from tonight, something that requires all these witnesses to be here, trapped, unable to call for help. Evelyn's mind raced, connecting dots she'd been too frightened to see clearly before. The timing of this dinner, the investors and board members all gathered in one place, the vote that had already happened before she'd arrived, Jennifer's mysterious message about asset extraction. This isn't about Project Meridian at all, she said slowly, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. Or it's not just about that. This is about the board vote, about removing me as CEO. She turned to look at her dinner companions, studying their faces with new understanding. Patricia had gone very pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. David wouldn't meet her eyes. Robert Fitzgerald was staring at his phone as if it might provide escape from whatever was unfolding. And Richard Blackwood, who'd orchestrated this entire dinner, who'd insisted on this specific date and this specific restaurant. Richard looked almost resigned, as if he'd known things would go wrong but hadn't had the courage to stop them. Someone at this table hired these men, Evelyn said. Someone knew the security systems, knew how to coordinate this attack, knew that I'd be here tonight with my daughter. Her voice hardened. Someone sold out everyone in this room to take control of my company. That's absurd, Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Why would anyone, for the same reason people do anything in our world? Power, money, control. Evelyn's gaze swept across the investors and board members. Crosstech is worth billions. Project Meridian alone could be worth hundreds of millions if the technology gets to market first. And if I'm removed as CEO, if I'm discredited or worse, whoever replaces me will have full access to everything I've built. The masked man hadn't moved, but Evelyn could see him listening, calculating. This wasn't part of his plan. Having the victim figure out the conspiracy wasn't supposed to happen, not before he'd secured what he came for. Fascinating theories, Ms. Cross, he said finally. But they don't change the situation. You still have... He glanced at a phone one of his companions held up. 8 minutes and 30 seconds to give us those codes. After that, we'll need to demonstrate our seriousness. And I promise you, you don't want us to do that. The countdown timer on every phone ticked down another second. Luna's face stared out from the screens, frozen in a moment of fear that would haunt Evelyn for the rest of her life if she couldn't find a way to end this. But she couldn't give them the codes. Caleb was right. Once these men had what they wanted, there was no reason to leave witnesses. And beyond that, Beyond even her own survival and the survival of everyone in this room, she couldn't hand over 3 years of work, 3 years of innovation that could change how AI integrated with critical infrastructure. In the wrong hands, Project Meridian could be weaponized in ways that went far beyond corporate espionage. "I need to know my daughter is safe," Evelyn said, buying time even as her mind raced through options. "The recording you played could have been made hours ago. I need to see her, talk to her, verify she's unharmed." The masked man tilted his head, considering. "You're stalling." "I'm being a mother." Evelyn's voice carried an edge that could cut steel. "You want me to give you the keys to something worth more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes? Fine, but I need to know that when I do, my daughter walks out of here alive, so let me see her, now." For a long moment, no one spoke. The countdown timer ticked down to 8:15. The emergency lighting cast everything in shades of red that made the entire scene feel like it was already drenched in blood. Then the masked man nodded slowly. "Fine, but you come alone. No heroics from your friend the maintenance man." His eyes found Caleb. "You stay here where my associates can keep an eye on you. And Ms. Cross, if you try anything at all, we start shooting hostages, starting with the board members who were stupid enough to think they could use us without consequences." Patricia made a small sound of distress. David's face went gray. So they had been involved, or at least they'd known something was going to happen tonight. Whether they'd understood the full scope of what they'd set in motion was another question. "All right," Evelyn said, "take me to my daughter." One of the other masked men moved forward, his weapon held in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate but stopped short of pointing directly at her. He gestured toward a service door that Evelyn recognized, the same one she'd used earlier to reach Luna. As she moved to follow him, Caleb caught her eye. He didn't speak, didn't gesture, but something passed between them, an understanding maybe, or a warning. He knew something she didn't, or he had a plan that he couldn't communicate with armed men watching their every move. Evelyn gave him the smallest nod and followed her escort into the service corridor. The red emergency lighting was even dimmer back here, making the familiar hallway feel claustrophobic and alien. Their footsteps echoed off concrete walls. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the mechanical hum of the building's emergency systems struggling to maintain basic operations. "Where are they?" she asked, trying to get any information she could. The masked man didn't answer. He just kept walking, leading her deeper into the building's service areas, past storage rooms and utility closets and doors marked staff only. Finally, he stopped in front of a door that looked like all the others except for a small security keypad mounted beside it. He punched in a code. Evelyn tried to see the numbers, but he was careful to block her view, and the door clicked open. "Inside," he said. Evelyn stepped through into what appeared to be a security monitoring room. Banks of screens covered one wall, showing feeds from cameras throughout the building. Most of the screens were dark or filled with static, but a few still worked, showing frightened people in the dining room, staff huddled in the kitchen, guests trapped in rooms upstairs trying to figure out what was happening. And there, on one of the screens, she saw them. Luna and Noah sat in what looked like a break room, still unaware they were being watched. Noah's hands were moving in fluid conversation, and Luna responded with the same animated gestures Evelyn had seen earlier. They looked scared, but not panicked, staying close to each other in the way children do when they're trying to be brave for each other's sake. "They're not actually in danger," a new voice said, and Evelyn spun around to find someone else in the room, someone without a mask. Jennifer Cho stood by one of the equipment racks, her earlier composure completely restored. She looked like she belonged here, in this room full of surveillance equipment and criminal conspiracy. Like she'd been here before. "You," Evelyn breathed. "You're behind this." "Behind it? No." Jennifer's smile was cold. "I'm just a facilitator. Someone who understood that Crosstech had become too valuable to leave in the hands of someone who couldn't protect it. Someone who saw an opportunity and connected the right people at the right time." "The board vote," Evelyn said, pieces still falling into place. "You orchestrated that. You convinced Patricia and David that I was a liability." "I didn't have to convince them of much. They already thought you were distracted, overly emotional, unable to make the hard decisions a CEO needs to make." Jennifer gestured toward the screen showing Luna and Noah. "Look at you now. About to hand over your company's most valuable asset because you can't separate your role as a mother from your role as a leader. You're proving their point. The words were meant to hurt, meant to make Evelyn doubt herself. And 6 months ago, they might have worked. But Evelyn had spent the past half year learning that the people who questioned her competence were often the same people who'd never had to make decisions with real consequences, who'd never had to balance competing responsibilities, who'd never understood that caring about people wasn't a weakness. It was the only thing that made leadership worth having. "Where are they really?" Evelyn asked, ignoring Jennifer's speech. "Not on the cameras. Where are my daughter and that boy actually being held?" Jennifer's smile faltered slightly. "Why would you think—" "Because Caleb was right about the recording being fake. And if you were capable of faking that, you're capable of faking this." Evelyn gestured at the screen. "This is looped footage, isn't it? Recorded earlier, playing back to make me think they're still there." She watched Jennifer's face carefully, looking for the tell that would confirm her suspicion. And there it was, a slight tightening around the eyes, a calculation happening behind the corporate mask. "You're smarter than they gave you credit for," Jennifer said finally, "but it doesn't matter what you think. What matters is that you don't actually know where they are, and until you give us those codes, you won't get the chance to find out." The countdown timer on the screens read 6:45, less than 7 minutes before whatever consequence these people had planned would unfold. Evelyn looked at the screens, at the looped footage of her daughter trying to be brave, at the other feeds showing terrified people trapped throughout the building. She thought about 15 years of work, about the company she'd built from nothing, about technology that could change the world or destroy it, depending on whose hands it fell into. And she thought about Luna signing to Noah in a language Evelyn had never learned, trying to comfort another child while frightened herself, being so much braver than any 8-year-old should have to be. "All right," Evelyn said quietly. "I'll give you the codes, but not here. I need to see my daughter first. The real location, not some camera feed you've manipulated. You take me to Luna, let me verify she's unharmed, and then I'll unlock Project Meridian for you." Jennifer studied her for a long moment. "You're not in a position to negotiate terms." "Neither are you." Evelyn kept her voice steady even though her heart was racing. "Because Caleb was telling the truth about the remote wipe sequence. I can see it from here." She pointed at one of the working screens which showed a Crosstech server status display. The encryption key integrity was at 73% and dropping. "In about 6 minutes, those codes I generate will be worthless. So you can either take me to my daughter now, or you can watch hundreds of millions of dollars evaporate while you try to threaten me into doing something that's already become impossible." It was a bluff. Evelyn had no idea what that server display actually meant, or whether Caleb's remote wipe sequence was real. But Jennifer didn't know that. And more importantly, Jennifer wasn't a technical expert. She was a venture capitalist who understood money and leverage, but probably couldn't tell real server diagnostics from fabricated ones. The other woman's face tightened with frustration. She pulled out a phone and typed rapidly, apparently consulting with whoever else was involved in this conspiracy. The seconds ticked by, 30, 40, a full minute of tense silence. Finally, Jennifer looked up. "Fine, but if this is some kind of trick—" "The only people who've been tricking anyone tonight are you and whoever else voted to remove me," Evelyn said flatly. "Now take me to my daughter." Yet Jennifer gestured to the masked man who'd escorted Evelyn here. He nodded and spoke into his radio in that language Evelyn still couldn't identify. A moment later, a response came back. "They're in the sub-basement," the masked man said. "Storage area. We'll take you there, but your daughter and the boy stay where they are until we have the codes. Non-negotiable." It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. At least Evelyn would know where Luna was, would be able to see that she was actually safe rather than trusting manipulated footage. They left the security room and headed deeper into the building's infrastructure, down a service stairwell that smelled of concrete and machine oil, past levels marked for parking and mechanical systems, down to a sub-basement that Evelyn hadn't even known existed. The emergency lighting was spotty here, leaving pools of shadow between widely spaced fixtures. The masked man stopped at a heavy door marked Storage 3B and knocked twice. A moment later, it swung open to reveal another masked figure, and, beyond him, a large room filled with the kind of miscellaneous building supplies and broken furniture that accumulates in any old establishment. And there, sitting on a desk pushed against the far wall, were Luna and Noah. They looked up as Evelyn entered, and Luna's face transformed, fear giving way to desperate relief. She started to slide off the desk, but the masked man guarding them held up a hand in warning. "Mom!" Luna's voice was too loud, the way it got when she couldn't hear herself properly. Her hands moved in frantic signs that Evelyn still couldn't read. "Mom, I was so scared. They said you were coming, but I didn't know if—" "I'm here, sweetheart." Evelyn took a step forward, but her escort caught her arm. "It's okay. I'm going to get you out of here." "You're going to give us the codes," Jennifer corrected from behind her. "And then maybe we'll let everyone leave unharmed." Evelyn didn't take her eyes off Luna. Her daughter looked physically fine, no injuries, no signs of rough treatment, but her eyes held a kind of fear that no child should have to experience, and Evelyn felt rage crystallize in her chest once more. "The codes," Jennifer prompted. "You've seen she's safe. Now keep your end of the bargain." Evelyn reached for her phone slowly, making no sudden movements that might spook the armed men surrounding them. She opened the secure application that accessed Crosstech's most protected systems. The interface required her fingerprint, facial recognition, and a 16-digit password that changed daily according to an algorithm only she and 2 other people knew. Her fingers hovered over the screen. One press, one authentication, and she'd generate codes that would give these people access to everything. All her work, all her innovation, all the potential that Project Meridian represented, both for good and for harm. But what choice did she have? Luna was here, frightened and vulnerable. Noah too, a child who'd done nothing except be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And upstairs, dozens of other innocent people trapped in a situation none of them had asked for. "Do it," Jennifer said, "or we start making this a lot less pleasant for everyone." Evelyn's finger moved toward the authentication button. She could see Luna watching her, could see the trust in her daughter's eyes, trust that Mom would fix this, that Mom would make everything okay the way she always tried to do. And then several things happened at once. The door they'd entered through burst open hard enough to slam against the wall. Someone shouted in that foreign language. The lights went out completely, not just dimmed, but utterly black, as if every electrical system in the entire building had failed simultaneously. In the darkness, Evelyn heard gunshots, 3 sharp cracks that echoed off concrete walls and made her heart stop. Someone screamed, something heavy hit the floor, and then a voice, Caleb's voice, cut through the chaos. "Luna! Noah! Get down!" Evelyn dropped to a crouch on pure instinct, trying to make herself a smaller target while simultaneously trying to locate Luna in the absolute darkness. Her hands found the desk, then small hands that grabbed onto hers with desperate strength. "Mom!" Luna's voice, terrified, but right there, close enough to hold. "I've got you," Evelyn said, pulling her daughter close. "I've got you, sweetheart. Just hold on to me." More shouts, more movement, the sound of a struggle, bodies hitting walls, the particular thud of someone going down hard, a grunt of pain that might have been male or female, might have been one of their captors, or one of the hostages, or someone else entirely. Then flashlight beams cut through the darkness, sweeping across the room in chaotic patterns. Evelyn saw snapshots of the scene like photographs in a strobe, one of the masked men on the ground, not moving, another backing toward a different exit. Jennifer pressed against a wall, her earlier confidence completely gone. The guard who'd been watching the children struggling with someone in dark clothing who moved with professional efficiency. Caleb. It had to be Caleb, though Evelyn couldn't see clearly enough to be certain. "Everyone stay down!" A new voice, American this time, with the kind of authority that came from law enforcement or military training. "FBI, nobody move!" FBI? How had the FBI gotten here? Communications had been cut off. No one could call for help. Unless someone had called before the blackout. Unless Caleb's background wasn't just NSA contractor. Unless this had been anticipated by someone who knew more than they'd been letting on. The flashlight beams converged on the room's exits, and in their light, Evelyn could finally see what had happened. 4 new people in tactical gear, real FBI tactical gear, she could see the insignia now, had secured the room. The masked men were either on the ground or had fled. Jennifer Cho stood frozen, her hands slowly rising in surrender, and Caleb knelt beside Noah, his hands moving in rapid signs to check that the boy was okay, his face showing the kind of fear that only a parent could feel. "Are you hurt?" he was asking Noah, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Tell me you're not hurt." Noah signed back. Evelyn couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear from the way Caleb's shoulders sagged with relief. Then Noah pointed at Luna, and Caleb's eyes found Evelyn's across the room. "You okay?" he called. Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice yet. Luna was pressed against her side, trembling but safe. Safe. The word kept repeating in Evelyn's mind like a prayer or a promise finally kept. One of the FBI agents moved toward them, her weapon lowered but ready. "Ma'am, I'm Special Agent Chen. Are you Evelyn Cross?" "Yes," Evelyn managed. "My daughter is safe now. You're all safe." Agent Chen's voice carried professional reassurance. "We've secured the building. The hostages upstairs are being evacuated. Medical teams are standing by." "How did you—" Evelyn started to ask, but the agent held up a hand. "Mr. Moore contacted us before the communications blackout went into full effect. He identified himself as a former colleague and provided enough information to get us mobilized." She glanced at Caleb. "Though he left out the part about children being in immediate danger. We had to move faster than planned when we realized—" "I told you everything I knew when I knew it," Caleb interrupted, still holding on to Noah like he might disappear if he let go. "The children were moved to this location after I made the call. I didn't know until—" He stopped, jaw tight. "It doesn't matter. Is everyone upstairs okay?" One security guard with minor injuries, several people in shock, but no fatalities. Agent Chen's expression hardened. "Though it could have gone very differently if you hadn't given us that heads up." Evelyn looked at Caleb with new understanding. He'd known something was wrong from the first power fluctuation. He'd assessed the situation, identified the threat, and taken action, all while pretending to be just a maintenance worker caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Who are you, really?" she asked quietly. Before Caleb could answer, Jennifer's voice cut through the moment with desperate defiance. "You don't understand what you've done. Crosstech was failing. The board voted. We had the right to make changes. This was just insurance, making sure the transition happened smoothly." "Insurance?" Evelyn stood slowly, making sure Luna stayed safely behind her. "You hired armed men to hold innocent people hostage. You threatened children. You were going to steal technology that could be weaponized, and you call that insurance?" "I call it doing what needed to be done." Jennifer's face twisted with something that might have been genuine belief or might have been the last desperate justification of someone who knew they'd gone too far. "You were going to destroy everything with your emotional leadership and your inability to make hard choices. Someone had to commit multiple felonies," Agent Chen interrupted. "Corporate espionage, kidnapping, conspiracy, assault on federal officers if we count the ones you tried to shoot when we breached. Ms. Cho, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." As another agent moved to formally arrest Jennifer, Evelyn felt the adrenaline that had been keeping her upright begin to fade. Her legs went unsteady. She sank back down to the floor, and Luna immediately pressed close, small arms wrapping around her mother's neck. "I was so scared," Luna whispered against Evelyn's shoulder. "I didn't know what was happening. Noah tried to explain, but he was scared too. And then that man came and said, 'We had to be quiet,' and I tried to be good, Mom. I tried to be so good." "You were perfect," Evelyn said, her voice breaking on the words. "You were so brave, sweetheart. So brave." She held her daughter and let herself feel everything she'd been pushing down for the past hour. The terror, the rage, the helplessness of not knowing if she'd be able to protect the person who mattered most. Let herself feel it and then, slowly, let it begin to drain away, replaced by the simple relief of Luna's heartbeat against her chest, solid and real and safe. Around them, federal agents secured the scene and began the work of processing what had happened. Evelyn heard them talking about the suspects who'd fled, about securing evidence, about interviewing witnesses. The professional machinery of law enforcement grinding into motion to make sense of chaos and assign consequences to choices. Eventually, Agent Chen returned to crouch beside them. Ms. Cross, we're going to need a full statement from you, and medical should check both you and your daughter, but that can wait a little while. First, let's get you both upstairs and out of this basement. Evelyn nodded, but when she tried to stand, she found her legs still weren't quite ready. Caleb appeared beside her, offering his hand. Come on, he said quietly. I've got you. She took his hand and let him help her up, Luna still clinging to her other side. Together they made their way back through the building's service areas, following the FBI agents and the emergency lighting that was gradually being restored to full power. As they climbed the stairs, Evelyn looked back at Caleb. You called the FBI before the blackout. You knew this was going to happen. I suspected, he corrected. The patterns were wrong, the timing too coordinated. I made the call as a precaution, but I didn't know for certain until... He stopped, choosing his words carefully. I worked security for a lot of years. You learn to recognize when something's off. NSA, Evelyn said, remembering what the masked man had said. You were NSA, and then you supposedly died. I got out, Caleb said simply. Started over. Built a different life for Noah and me. The kind of life where I fix electrical panels and help him with homework instead of... He stopped again, aware that Luna was listening even if she couldn't hear every word. Instead of other things. They emerged into the restaurant's service corridor, then into the dining room itself. The scene there was controlled chaos. Police and FBI moving through, taking statements, guiding hostages toward exits. Emergency vehicles flashed red and blue through the windows. Someone had turned on all the regular lights, making everything seem too bright, too normal after the nightmare of the past hour. Evelyn's dinner companions were clustered near their table, all looking various degrees of shaken. Patricia's perfect makeup was ruined by tears. David stared at nothing, face gray with shock or guilt. Robert was on his phone, already calling lawyers if Evelyn had to guess. Richard sat alone, head in his hands. Only Marcus Webb looked relatively composed, though even he had lost his earlier arrogance. When he saw Evelyn, he stood and approached slowly, hands visible in a gesture of non-threat. Evelyn, I had no idea, none of us knew it would... He stopped, seeming to realize how hollow any explanation would sound. I'm sorry, we were wrong, about all of it. Evelyn looked at him, at all of them, and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness. She wasn't ready for that, might never be ready, but a kind of cold clarity about what came next. The board vote, she said quietly. I want it reversed. Tonight. Or I walk away and you can explain to the shareholders why Crosstech's CEO quit in the middle of a federal investigation into corporate espionage orchestrated by your own board member. Marcus's face went very still. You're asking us to piss... I'm not asking. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Evelyn's voice carried the kind of steel that came from having survived something that should have broken her. You vote now. You vote unanimously to affirm my position as CEO, or I will burn this company to the ground on my way out. Your choice. She saw him calculating, weighing options, trying to find some angle that would let him maintain control. But they both knew she held every card that mattered. The FBI would be investigating everyone connected to tonight's events. The media would be ravenous for the story. And Crosstech's reputation, its very survival, would depend on showing stable leadership that could navigate the crisis rather than infighting that had enabled it. I'll make the calls, Bus, Marcus said finally. We can have an emergency board meeting convened within the hour. Good. Evelyn turned away from him, back to Luna, who'd been watching with wide eyes. Let's go outside, sweetheart. I think we've spent enough time in this building. They walked toward the exit, passing through rooms full of federal agents and shocked witnesses, until finally pushing through the front doors into cold December air that felt like absolution. Snow was falling harder now, covering the city in white that made everything look clean and new despite the violence and fear that had just unfolded. Luna tilted her face up to catch snowflakes, and for a moment she looked like just a child again. Not a hostage, not a pawn in corporate warfare, just an 8-year-old girl experiencing the simple joy of snow on her face. Caleb and Noah emerged behind them, and the boys immediately found each other, hands moving in rapid conversation as they processed what they'd survived together. Thank you, Evelyn said to Caleb, For everything. For protecting them. For calling the FBI. She stopped, not quite sure how to articulate what he'd done, the way he'd understood the situation and acted when she'd been too paralyzed by fear to see all the angles. You don't need to thank me, Caleb said. I was just... Noah is everything to me. If something had happened to him, his voice roughened. I would have burned that building down myself to get him out. So I understand what you were feeling, what you were willing to do. They stood together in the falling snow, two parents who'd survived something that should have destroyed them, watching their children sign to each other in a language of resilience and relief. And Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in 6 months, maybe longer. A sense that she wasn't alone in this. That maybe she didn't have to be the CEO who never showed weakness, the mother who never admitted she needed help, the woman who carried everything herself because asking for support felt like failure. Inside the restaurant, she could see through the windows as Marcus Webb made phone calls, assembling the board for their emergency meeting. In a few hours, she'd have to face them again, have to be the CEO who demanded accountability and charted the path forward. But right now, in this moment, she was just a mother holding her daughter's hand while snow fell on Manhattan, and the worst night of her life finally came to an end. Or so she thought, until Agent Chen emerged from the building with an expression that made Evelyn's momentary peace evaporate. Ms. Cross, we need to talk, the agent said. We've been reviewing the security footage from before the communications blackout, and there's something you need to see. The snow that had seemed like absolution moments ago now felt like a curtain hiding something darker. Evelyn's hand tightened on Luna's, every protective instinct that had briefly relaxed now snapping back into full alert. Agent Chen's expression carried the weight of someone about to deliver news that would change everything. Again. What did you find? Evelyn asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Not here. Agent Chen glanced at Luna, then at the crowd of police and media that was beginning to gather beyond the security perimeter. Somewhere private. This involves the board vote, the leak that happened 6 months ago, and who was actually behind tonight's attack. Caleb stepped closer, positioning himself so that both children were partially shielded by his presence. The kids have been through enough. Whatever you need to show Ms. Cross can wait until they're safe, Agent Chen agreed. There's a command vehicle around the corner. Climate-controlled, secure. The children can wait there with one of our family liaison officers while we talk. Evelyn looked down at Luna, who was watching the exchange with the kind of careful attention that meant she was picking up on the tension even if she couldn't hear every word. Her daughter's earlier relief had faded, replaced by a wariness that broke Evelyn's heart all over again. How many times tonight had Luna thought things were okay, only to have fear resurface? Sweetheart, Evelyn said, kneeling down to Luna's level, Agent Chen needs to talk to me about grown-up things, but you'll be safe with Noah and a nice officer. I'll be right nearby, 10 minutes, I promise. Luna's hands moved in signs Evelyn still couldn't read, her face showing the internal debate between wanting to be brave and needing the security of her mother's presence. Finally, she nodded, but her grip on Evelyn's hand didn't loosen. I'll stay with them, Caleb offered. Noah's been through trauma before. He knows how to process it, but he shouldn't be alone right now. And Luna. He met Evelyn's eyes. Luna shouldn't be alone either. The fact that a stranger understood her daughter's needs better than half the board of directors ever had struck Evelyn with fresh force. But this was neither the time nor place to unpack that particular revelation. Thank you, she said, and meant it in ways that went beyond the immediate situation. They walked around the corner to where a large black vehicle sat with FBI insignia on its side. Inside, it was exactly as Agent Chen had described, climate-controlled, with bench seating and the kind of equipment that suggested this was a mobile command center. A female officer with kind eyes and the badge of someone trained in crisis management greeted them warmly, immediately engaging both children with questions about their favorite things, while Agent Chen led Evelyn to a small conference area in the back of the vehicle. A laptop sat open on the narrow table, its screen dark but waiting. Agent Chen settled into one seat and gestured for Evelyn to take the other. What I'm about to show you is part of an ongoing investigation, the agent began. The Bureau has been looking into corporate espionage cases targeting tech companies for the past 18 months. Crosstech wasn't the first company hit, But your case was different, more personal, more surgical in what was taken and how. Evelyn felt her pulse accelerate. You've known about the leak this whole time? We've known about a pattern. Individual companies reported security breaches, intellectual property theft, but no one connected the dots until we started seeing the same methodologies, the same digital fingerprints. Agent Chen pulled up something on the laptop. 3 months ago, we identified a conspiracy involving multiple venture capital firms, board members from various companies, and a group of former intelligence operatives selling their skills to the highest bidder. Jennifer Cho, Evelyn said quietly. She was part of this larger conspiracy. She was a recruiter, someone who identified vulnerable targets, CEOs who could be pressured or removed, companies whose technology was valuable enough to steal, but whose security could be compromised. Agent Chen's fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up files. But here's what we didn't know until tonight. The specific timeline of who betrayed Crosstech and when. She turned the laptop toward Evelyn. On the screen was security footage from the Drake, time-stamped from earlier that evening, before the power failures, before the hostage situation, before everything had fallen apart. The angle showed the restaurant's parking area and entrance. Watch, Agent Chen said, and pressed play. The footage showed luxury cars pulling up, well-dressed people entering the restaurant. Evelyn recognized several faces, investors, board members, herself and Luna arriving. Timestamps ticked by as the dinner guests assembled. Then, at 7:43 p.m., a car Evelyn didn't recognize pulled up. The driver stayed in the vehicle, but the passenger got out and walked purposefully toward a service entrance around the side of the building. Agent Chen paused the video on a clear shot of the passenger's face, Patricia Morrison. Your board member arrived 45 minutes before the dinner was scheduled to start, Agent Chen said. And she didn't use the main entrance. She went directly to the service area where someone was waiting for her. The agent advanced the video. Patricia disappeared inside, and for several minutes nothing happened. Then, at 7:51 p.m., she emerged, and she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by one of the masked men from tonight's attack, though in this footage he wasn't wearing a mask. He was just a face, ordinary and unremarkable except for what he represented. They spoke for less than a minute. Patricia handed him something, too small to see clearly in the footage, but the shape suggested a USB drive or access card. Then she returned to the car and drove around to the main entrance, arriving fashionably late at 8:07 p.m., as if she'd been delayed by traffic rather than coordinating with the people who would terrorize everyone an hour later. Evelyn stared at the frozen image of Patricia's face, illuminated by the parking lot lights, showing no signs of stress or guilt. Just cold determination. She gave them access to the building's security systems, Evelyn said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. That's why they could disable everything so completely. They had the codes, the overrides, everything they needed. That's our assessment, Agent Chen confirmed. But it gets worse. Keep watching. She advanced the footage again. At 8:15 p.m., another car arrived. This one Evelyn recognized immediately, Richard Blackwood's distinctive silver Mercedes. He parked but didn't immediately get out. Instead, he sat in the driver's seat for 3 full minutes, his phone pressed to his ear in an animated conversation. The video had no audio, but Evelyn didn't need to hear the words to read Richard's body language. This wasn't a man confirming dinner reservations. This was someone receiving information that made him angry, frustrated, maybe even frightened. Finally, Richard ended the call and entered the restaurant through the main entrance. Normal, expected, except now Evelyn was seeing it through a different lens. He knew, she whispered. He knew something was going to happen tonight. We believe so, but here's where it gets complicated. Agent Chen pulled up a different set of files, phone records, text messages, email chains. Richard Blackwood's communications show he was in contact with Jennifer Cho extensively over the past 3 months. They were planning the board coup, coordinating the investor pressure, setting up tonight's ambush. Then he's guilty. He's part of this. He's complicit in the corporate conspiracy, Agent Chen agreed. But the actual attack, the armed men, the hostage situation, the threats against your daughter, that wasn't part of his plan. Look at this. She pulled up a series of text messages from earlier in the day, exchanged between Richard and Jennifer. Richard, 3:47 p.m. Everything set for tonight. Board vote is locked. Evelyn will have no choice but to accept the COO position. Jennifer, 3:52 p.m. Good. Once she's sidelined, we can proceed with Phase 2. Richard, 3:53 p.m. What's Phase 2? You said tonight was just about the vote. Jennifer, 4:01 p.m. The vote is the foundation. Everything else builds from there. Trust me. Richard, 4:03 p.m. Jennifer, what exactly are you planning? No response to that last message. Richard had sent 3 more texts over the following hour, each more urgent, each unanswered. The last one, sent at 5:34 p.m., read, "If you're planning something beyond what we agreed, I need to know now. This can't blow back on any of us." He didn't know about the armed attack, Evelyn said slowly, processing this new information. He thought they were just going to force a board vote. Corporate pressure tactics, not armed hostage-taking and attempted theft of classified technology, Agent Chen finished. Which is why, when things started going wrong tonight, he looked more shocked than guilty. He'd helped create the situation, but Jennifer and her partners took it far beyond what he'd agreed to. Evelyn thought back to the dining room, to Richard's face when the lights first flickered. The confusion that had seemed genuine because it was genuine. He'd orchestrated a corporate coup but found himself trapped in something far more dangerous. Does that make him less guilty? She asked. He still conspired to remove me. He still helped set up tonight. No, it doesn't make him less guilty, but it does make him a potential witness against the people who are more guilty. Agent Chen's expression was carefully neutral. The Bureau is interested in the larger conspiracy, the network that's been targeting multiple companies, the intelligence operatives selling their services, the venture capitalists funding industrial espionage. Richard Blackwood could provide testimony that takes down that entire network. In exchange for what? A lighter sentence? Immunity? That's not my department. Prosecutors will make those decisions. But I'm telling you this because you deserve to know the full picture before you walk back into that restaurant and face your board. Agent Chen closed the laptop. Patricia Morrison is being arrested as we speak. She's facing federal charges that will likely put her away for decades. Jennifer Cho is in custody, and she's already trying to cut a deal, which means she'll implicate everyone she worked with. Your board is about to be decimated by the fallout from tonight. Evelyn sat back, trying to absorb the scope of what had unfolded. 6 months ago, someone had stolen Crosstech's intellectual property. She'd spent half a year hunting for the leak, suspecting everyone, trusting no one. And all along, the betrayal had come from the very people who were supposed to provide oversight and guidance, her own board of directors. David Chen, Evelyn said suddenly. He voted against me. Was he involved? Agent Chen pulled up another file. David Chen received significant investment from Jennifer Cho's firm shortly before he joined your board. We believe he was pressured into supporting the coup, but we haven't found evidence he knew about tonight's attack. He's cooperating with investigators now. So many betrayals, layered and complex. Some born of greed, some of coercion, some of simple moral weakness. And at the center of it all had been Evelyn, trying to lead a company while surrounded by people who'd decided she was the problem rather than their own corruption. The board vote tonight, Evelyn said. Marcus Webb said he'd call an emergency meeting to reverse it. But if Patricia's being arrested and Jennifer's in custody, the vote will be complicated by the arrests. But technically, you still have the board members who supported you originally, plus the ones who are now facing potential charges if they don't cooperate with investigators. Agent Chen's smile was thin. I suspect you'll find them much more amenable to affirming your leadership. It was a victory built on rubble and ashes. Evelyn would keep her position as CEO, but the company she led would be damaged by scandal, investigated by federal authorities, viewed with suspicion by investors and partners who'd wonder how much of Crosstech's leadership had been compromised. And yet somehow, it felt like the right outcome. Better to rebuild from a foundation of truth, however painful, than to continue building on lies and betrayal. There's one more thing, Agent Chen said, her tone shifting to something more personal. Your daughter. Tonight, when things got dangerous, she did something remarkable. Evelyn's breath caught. What do you mean? The agent pulled up another video file, this one from the security camera in the break room where Luna and Noah had been held initially before they'd been moved to the sub-basement. The footage showed both children sitting together, Luna's hands moving in rapid conversation with Noah. This was about 15 minutes before the FBI breach, Agent Chen explained. One of the guards was in the room with them, his weapon visible. Watch what Luna does. In the video, Luna suddenly stood up and walked directly toward the armed guard. Evelyn's heart clenched seeing her daughter approach danger so deliberately. The guard said something, warning her back probably, but Luna kept signing, her hands moving in gestures that were clearly meant to communicate. The guard looked confused, frustrated. He gestured for Luna to sit back down, but Luna shook her head and continued signing, more emphatic now. Finally, Noah stood and spoke. Evelyn could see his mouth moving, though there was no audio. Whatever Noah said made the guard's expression change from irritation to something else. He lowered his weapon slightly and pulled out his phone, typing something. A moment later, he showed the phone to both children, and Luna's face lit up with an expression of triumph. "What happened?" Evelyn asked, transfixed by the footage. "Your daughter told Noah to tell the guard that she had a medical condition, that she was diabetic and needed her insulin pump checked regularly or she could have a seizure." Agent Chen's voice carried a note of admiration. It wasn't true, obviously, but the guard believed it because Noah sold it so convincingly. He typed a message to his partners asking what to do about a medical emergency with one of the hostages. And that message was intercepted by our team when we were monitoring communications from the building. It gave us crucial information about where the children were being held, and that at least one guard was uncertain enough to question orders. Agent Chen paused. "Your daughter is 8 years old and she manufactured a tactical advantage that helped save lives tonight. She's remarkable." Evelyn felt tears burn behind her eyes for the first time since this nightmare had begun. Luna, quiet, accommodating Luna, who'd learned to make herself small in a world that didn't always know how to include her, had found a way to fight back when it mattered most, had used her intelligence and courage to create an opening that helped end the siege. "I need to go to her," Evelyn said, standing abruptly. "I need to tell her. She needs to know her mother is safe and proud of her," Agent Chen agreed, standing as well. "The emergency board meeting is being convened in a conference room at the FBI field office downtown. You'll need to attend, but you have time. Take care of your daughter first. The corporate politics can wait another hour." They exited the small conference area and returned to where Luna and Noah sat with Caleb and the family liaison officer. Both children were drawing on paper the officer had provided. Luna's drawing showed a building with people inside, stick figures holding hands in a way that suggested safety rather than captivity. Processing through art, what words couldn't quite capture. When Luna saw Evelyn, she dropped the crayon and ran into her mother's arms with the kind of desperate relief that children show when they've been brave for as long as they can stand but can finally be small and scared again. "I'm so proud of you," Evelyn whispered into Luna's hair. "Agent Chen told me what you did, how you helped. You were so smart, sweetheart, so brave." Luna pulled back far enough to look at her mother's face, searching for something. "I remembered," she said, her voice soft. "You always tell me that being deaf doesn't make me less. It just makes me different. And different can be strong." Evelyn had said those words 100 times, trying to build her daughter's confidence, trying to counter the world's tendency to see disability as deficit. But she'd never truly understood that Luna had internalized them, had made them part of her identity in ways that would give her courage when she needed it most. "Different is strong," Evelyn repeated, "and you are the strongest person I know." Caleb approached, Noah at his side. "The FBI is offering protective detail for the next few days while they round up the rest of the conspirators. I'd recommend taking it, for both of you." "What about you and Noah?" Evelyn asked. "We're used to staying off the grid. It's been our life for 3 years." Caleb's smile was rueful. "Though after tonight, my cover as a simple maintenance worker is pretty thoroughly blown. Might be time to rethink our approach." Noah signed something, and Caleb's expression softened. He translated for Evelyn and Luna's benefit. He says he's glad Luna was with him, that she made being scared less lonely. Luna's hands moved in response, and this time Evelyn recognized a few of the signs, friend and brave, and what might have been thank you. Noah grinned and signed back, and for a moment they were just two kids who'd survived something terrible together and found friendship in the survival. I need to attend this board meeting, Evelyn said reluctantly. But after that, she looked at Caleb. After that, I'd like to talk about what happens next for Crosstech, but also, she glanced at Luna and Noah, at the easy way they communicated, at the gap in her own ability to connect with her daughter. I need to learn, really learn, not just basic signs, but the language, the culture, everything I should have learned years ago. I can help with that, Caleb offered. And Crosstech, if you're serious about making the company more accessible, more inclusive, I'd be interested in consulting, real consulting, not just showing up for photo ops, building something that actually makes a difference. It was strange how quickly the future could shift. An hour ago, Evelyn had been facing the loss of her company, trapped in a hostage situation with no clear path forward. Now she was planning how to rebuild, how to transform crisis into opportunity, how to become the kind of CEO who didn't just talk about values but embodied them. Agent Chen reappeared, checking her watch. Ms. Cross, the car is ready to take you downtown. The board is assembling now. Evelyn looked down at Luna. I have to go to a meeting, sweetheart, but I'll be back as soon as possible. A few hours at most. Luna's face showed disappointment, but also understanding. She'd spent her life waiting for her mother to finish meetings, to complete calls, to handle the endless demands of running a company. But something in her expression suggested this time felt different, that whatever happened tonight had shifted the dynamic between them in ways both were still processing. Okay, Luna said simply. Then her hands moved and she spoke and signed simultaneously. I love you, Mom. It was the first time Evelyn had seen her daughter choose to sign something she could have just spoken. A deliberate choice to use both languages, to embrace all of who she was. I love you too, Evelyn said, and tried to mirror the sign Luna had made, her hands clumsy and uncertain, but attempting. Luna smiled, genuinely smiled, and corrected her mother's hand position slightly. Like this, she demonstrated, then repeated it slowly so Evelyn could follow. It was such a small moment, such a simple exchange, but it felt like the beginning of something Evelyn should have started years ago. A real conversation in the language her daughter had been trying to speak all along. 40 minutes later, Evelyn sat in a conference room at the FBI field office downtown, facing what remained of her board of directors. Patricia's chair was conspicuously empty. Jennifer, of course, had never been a board member, just a puppet master pulling strings from the shadows. But her absence was felt nonetheless. Marcus Webb cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable in a way that went beyond the late hour and shocking circumstances. Evelyn, I want to start by saying that all of us, those of us who remain, are profoundly sorry for what happened tonight. We failed in our oversight responsibilities. We failed you, and we failed the company. Some of you failed more actively than others, Evelyn said evenly. Patricia didn't just fail in oversight. She committed federal crimes. Richard conspired to orchestrate a coup, even if he didn't know how far it would go. David was compromised by financial pressure from people we should have vetted more carefully. The three men she'd named shifted uncomfortably. Richard especially looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. David stared at his hands. Marcus at least had the courage to meet her eyes. Yes, Marcus agreed. All of that is true, which is why we've already taken several actions. First, Patricia Morrison has been removed from the board effective immediately, pending criminal proceedings. Second, we voted unanimously to rescind tonight's earlier vote regarding the COO position. You remain CEO with full authority. Unanimously, Evelyn repeated. Because you're all worried about federal charges? Because we were wrong, David said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken since she'd entered the room. I was pressured by Jennifer's firm, yes, but I still had a choice. I still voted against you because it was easier to believe their narrative than to stand up for what I knew was right. That's on me. Richard still hadn't spoken. Evelyn turned her attention to him fully, waiting until he had no choice but to look up and face her. You helped orchestrate this, she said. You coordinated with Jennifer. You knew tonight was supposed to be an ambush, even if you claim you didn't know about the violence. Why should I accept your vote now? Why should I trust anything you say? You shouldn't, Richard said bluntly. His earlier confidence was completely gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse, or at least genuine fear of consequences. I don't expect trust or forgiveness. I expect to be removed from this board and possibly face charges. I'm here because the FBI asked me to cooperate, and because he stopped, struggling with the words. Because I need to try to make this right, even though I can't. I helped create a situation that put innocent people in danger, that put your daughter in danger. No corporate maneuver, no business justification makes that acceptable. It was, Evelyn thought, the first entirely honest thing Richard Blackwood had said to her in 6 months. The FBI has offered me a deal, Richard continued, testimony against the larger conspiracy in exchange for reduced charges. I'm going to take it, but I'm also resigning from the board effective immediately. Crosstech deserves better leadership than I provided. David? Evelyn turned to the newest board member. What about you? I'd like to stay, David said carefully. I'd like the chance to actually provide the kind of oversight and support the board is supposed to provide. But I understand if you want me gone. I'll resign if that's your decision. Evelyn considered. David had been compromised, but he hadn't been actively malicious. He'd been weak, not evil. And everyone deserved a chance at redemption, though whether he'd earn it remained to be seen. You can stay, she said finally, but you're on probation. One hint of divided loyalty, one suggestion that you're putting investor interests above the company's well-being, and you're done. Clear? Crystal clear, David agreed, relief evident on his face. That left Marcus and the 2 other board members who'd remained silent through the meeting, both of whom had voted in Evelyn's favor originally and who looked shell-shocked by the night's revelations. The board needs to be rebuilt, Evelyn said. We need members who actually understand technology, who value innovation over quarterly returns, who won't sell out the company they're supposed to protect. And we need diversity, real diversity, not token appointments, people with different perspectives, different experiences, different ways of seeing problems. Agreed, Marcus said. We'll open a search for new members immediately. And Evelyn, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I want you to lead that search, not us. You pick the people you want to work with. You build the board you need to succeed. It was a significant concession. Board searches were usually controlled by existing board members, a way of maintaining power and continuity. For Marcus to offer her that authority suggested he understood just how thoroughly the old power structures had failed. I'll need that in writing, Evelyn said. Board resolution giving me authority over the selection process, subject only to final approval votes. I'm not rebuilding this company just to have the same problems resurface a year from now. You'll have it, Marcus promised. Tonight, before anyone leaves this room. They spent the next hour hammering out details. The formal resolutions, the press statements that would need to be carefully crafted to manage the scandal, the immediate steps to secure Crosstech's technology and ensure no further breaches. By the time they finished, it was past 2 a.m. on Christmas Day. Evelyn left the FBI building exhausted but strangely energized. She'd survived an attempted coup, a hostage situation, and the revelation that people she'd trusted had betrayed her in ways both petty and profound. But she'd also discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, and she'd seen her daughter demonstrate courage that humbled and inspired her. The FBI car took her back to the Drake, where Luna was waiting with Caleb and Noah in a small office the restaurant had made available. Someone had brought food from the kitchen, sandwiches and hot chocolate that the children had mostly ignored in favor of more drawing and signing. When Luna saw her mother, she ran to her with the same desperate relief as before, and Evelyn held her just as tightly, not caring that federal agents and restaurant staff were watching, not caring about anything except the solid reality of her daughter in her arms. It's over, Evelyn said, really over. We're going home. What about the bad people? Luna asked, pulling back to look at her mother's face. The bad people are going to jail, Evelyn said simply. The FBI caught them. They can't hurt us anymore. All of them? Luna's skepticism showed hard-earned wisdom. She'd learned tonight that the world held more danger than her mother had been able to protect her from. Most of them, Evelyn amended honestly. Some got away, but the FBI is looking for them. And we're going to be very careful for a while. We'll have people making sure we're safe. Luna nodded slowly, processing this. Then her hands moved in a question that Caleb translated. She wants to know if the people from your meeting, the ones who were mean to you, If they're going to jail too. Evelyn glanced at Caleb, then back at Luna. Her daughter had picked up more than she'd realized about the corporate dynamics, about the tensions that had been simmering before the violence erupted. Some of them made very bad choices, Evelyn said carefully. One of them will probably go to jail. Others they were wrong about things, and they know it now, and they're going to try to do better. She paused, searching for words that would make sense to an 8-year-old. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, even big mistakes, and they have to face consequences. But some mistakes you can fix, and some you can't. Which kind did you make? Luna asked with the blunt directness of children who hadn't yet learned to soften hard questions. The question hit Evelyn like a physical blow. What do you mean, sweetheart? You said sometimes you can fix mistakes, Luna said, her hands and voice working together to express something she'd clearly been holding inside. You've been at work a lot. You've been sad a lot. You don't talk to me the way Noah's dad talks to him. She glanced at Caleb, then back at her mother. Is that a mistake you can fix? Silence filled the small office. Even the federal agents who'd been hovering nearby seemed to have found reasons to step outside, giving them privacy for this moment. Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes for the second time that night. Her daughter, her quiet, accommodating daughter who'd learned to ask for so little, was asking for what she'd needed all along. Not expensive toys or fancy vacations or the prestige of being a CEO's child. Just her mother's attention, her mother's presence, her mother's effort to truly communicate in the language Luna had been speaking since birth. Yes, Evelyn said, her voice rough with emotion. That's a mistake I can fix. That's a mistake I'm going to fix, starting right now. Starting with learning to really talk to you the way you deserve. She looked at Caleb. You offered to help me learn sign language. I'm accepting. Formal lessons as soon as possible. And consulting work for Crosstech. I want to build accessibility into everything we do, not just check boxes for compliance. I can do that, Caleb agreed. But Evelyn, learning ASL is more than just learning signs. It's learning a whole culture, a whole way of understanding the world. It takes time and commitment. It means accepting that you're going to make mistakes and look foolish and struggle with things that seem basic. Good, Evelyn said firmly, because I've spent 8 years taking shortcuts, convincing myself that Luna's spoken English was enough, that her lip-reading skills meant I didn't have to put in the hard work of learning her native language. I've spent 8 years being a coward about the one thing that mattered most. I'm done with that. Luna was watching her mother's face with an expression that was hard to read, hope mixed with wariness, as if she'd heard promises before that hadn't been kept. Evelyn couldn't blame her for the skepticism, but she could start building a new foundation, one honest conversation at a time. I mean it, Evelyn said, looking directly at Luna. Things are going to change. I'm going to change, not because of what happened tonight, though that showed me a lot of things I needed to see, but because you deserve better than you've been getting. You deserve a mother who speaks your language, not just the one she finds convenient. Luna's eyes filled with tears. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when something you've wanted for a long time finally seems possible. She signed something, and this time Evelyn didn't need translation to understand the emotion behind it, even if she couldn't read the specific words. Caleb translated anyway, his voice soft. She says she loves you, and she's proud of you too. And there, in a small office at the back of a restaurant where the worst night of their lives had unfolded, Evelyn Cross began the work of becoming not just a CEO who survived a corporate coup, but a mother who finally learned to truly listen to her daughter's voice, in whatever language it chose to speak. The days after Christmas passed in a blur of federal investigations, media scrutiny, and emergency damage control that tested every skill Evelyn had developed over 15 years of building Crosstech. But through all of it, the interviews with FBI agents, the carefully worded press conferences, the anxious calls from investors wondering if their money was safe, there was one constant that kept her grounded. Every morning at 7, before the chaos of the day could consume her, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table with Luna and practiced sign language. The first lesson happened 3 days after Christmas Eve in Caleb's modest apartment in Brooklyn, where he and Noah had lived quietly for 3 years, hidden in plain sight from whatever past had forced them underground. The space was smaller than Evelyn's penthouse, furnished with mismatched pieces that suggested function over style, but it felt more like a home than her own place ever had. Photos covered the walls. Noah at different ages, always smiling, always surrounded by evidence of a father's devotion. "We'll start with the basics," Caleb had said, sitting across from Evelyn at a kitchen table scarred with years of homework and art projects. Luna and Noah were in the living room, Noah teaching Luna some kind of card game that required no spoken words at all. The alphabet, common phrases, household vocabulary. "But I want you to understand something first." He'd looked at her with an intensity that suggested this was more important than any corporate strategy she'd ever learned. Sign language isn't just English translated into hand shapes. It's its own language, with its own grammar, its own idioms, its own way of expressing concepts that don't always have direct English equivalents. You're not learning a code. You're learning a worldview. Evelyn had nodded, feeling the weight of years of missed opportunities pressing down on her shoulders. "I understand, or I'm beginning to." "Good. Because Luna will know if you're just going through the motions to check a box. Kids always know." Caleb's hands had begun to move, forming shapes that flowed together like music. "This is learn. This is patience. This is together. Those three concepts. That's what we're starting with." Now, 2 weeks into the new year, Evelyn could fingerspell her way through simple sentences, could follow basic conversations if people signed slowly enough, could feel her brain literally rewiring itself to process visual information as language rather than just gesture. It was humbling and frustrating and occasionally made her want to throw her practice materials across the room when she couldn't master a concept that Luna had understood instinctively at 3 years old. But every time she successfully signed a complete thought and saw her daughter's face light up with understanding, it felt like a small miracle. "You're getting better," Luna said one morning, watching her mother practice the signs for different emotions. "Your hand shapes are clearer. You're not thinking so hard about each movement." "I'm trying," Evelyn said, then switched to sign, her hands forming the words carefully. "I want to talk with you, not at you." Luna's smile was reward enough for all the hours of practice, all the cramped fingers and mental exhaustion. "You are talking with me, finally." The finally carried no accusation, just simple truth, and Evelyn accepted it as the grace it was, her daughter's willingness to meet her halfway, to celebrate progress rather than dwelling on what had been missing for so long. Crosstech's recovery was slower and more complicated. The media had pounced on the Christmas Eve hostage situation with the kind of feeding frenzy that came from having all the elements of a perfect scandal: corporate espionage, board-level conspiracy, armed criminals, a dramatic FBI rescue. Evelyn's face was plastered across business news for 2 solid weeks, analysts debating whether she could possibly survive as CEO or whether the taint of scandal would force her out regardless of her innocence. The stock price had plummeted initially, dropping 30% in the first trading day after news broke. Investors panicked, called emergency meetings, demanded explanations for how their due diligence had failed to catch board members who were actively sabotaging the company. But then something unexpected happened. The details of what Luna had done, how an 8-year-old deaf girl had helped the FBI locate hostages and create tactical advantages, leaked to the press. Not from Evelyn, who'd been fiercely protective of her daughter's privacy, but from someone at the Bureau who apparently thought the story was too inspiring to keep quiet. The narrative shifted. Instead of embattled CEO nearly loses company to internal coup, the headlines became CEO's daughter shows extraordinary courage during hostage crisis. Human interest pieces ran interviews with child psychologists marveling at Luna's composure under pressure. Disability rights advocates held her up as an example of how deaf children were capable of remarkable things when given the chance to thrive. And Crosstech, battered, scandal-plagued Crosstech, suddenly found itself with a CEO whose daughter embodied exactly the kind of courage and intelligence that the company's AI products were supposed to enable in everyone. Marcus Webb had called 3 days after the first wave of positive coverage, his voice carrying a mix of relief and calculation. The investors are calming down. They're starting to see that maybe the problem wasn't your leadership, but the people who tried to undermine it. Maybe, Evelyn had agreed carefully, not willing to fully trust his change in tune. Or maybe they're just responding to good PR. Does it matter? Either way, you've got breathing room to implement the changes you want. Marcus had paused, then added, "For what it's worth, Evelyn, I'm genuinely sorry. I should have seen what Patricia and Richard were planning. I should have backed you more strongly from the beginning. It wasn't quite enough, but it was something. A foundation to potentially rebuild on if Marcus proved through actions rather than words that he meant what he said." The search for new board members became Evelyn's priority once the immediate crisis stabilized. She'd meant what she said about wanting diversity, not just demographic diversity, though that mattered, but diversity of thought and experience. She wanted board members who'd built things rather than just invested in them, who understood that real innovation required risk and patience, who wouldn't panic at the first sign of trouble. And she wanted at least one board member who understood disability not as a liability to be managed, but as a different way of experiencing and navigating the world. That's how she found herself in a coffee shop in downtown Seattle 6 weeks after Christmas, interviewing a woman named Dr. Melissa Tran for a board position. Dr. Tran was 42, a former NASA engineer who'd founded her own adaptive technology company after losing her hearing in a lab accident. Her products had revolutionized how deaf and hard of hearing scientists could work in laboratory environments. She was brilliant, accomplished, and completely unimpressed by corporate posturing. "Why me?" Dr. Tran asked bluntly, her sign language interpreter sitting beside her to facilitate the conversation. "You've got plenty of candidates with better name recognition, bigger exits, more traditional board experience. Because you understand something most board members don't," Evelyn said, making sure to maintain eye contact with Dr. Tran rather than her interpreter. The way Caleb had taught her was respectful. "You understand that accessibility isn't a charity initiative or a compliance requirement. It's a design philosophy that makes products better for everyone." Dr. Tran's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a nice pitch. Do you actually believe it, or is this damage control after the media coverage of your daughter?" Evelyn appreciated the directness. She was tired of people who danced around hard questions. 6 weeks ago, I would have said I believed it, but couldn't have told you specifically how Crosstech's products were failing deaf users. I'd never thought deeply about it because I'd never had to. I had a deaf daughter, but I'd spent 8 years treating her deafness as something to work around rather than something to design for. "And now?" Dr. Tran asked. "Now I'm learning sign language. Now I'm consulting with accessibility experts, including the man who saved my daughter's life during the hostage situation. Now I'm requiring every product team at Crosstech to include accessibility testing from the earliest design phases, not as an afterthought." Evelyn leaned forward. "But I need someone on the board who'll hold me accountable to those commitments. Someone who'll call me out if we start treating accessibility like a box to check rather than a fundamental value. That's why you." Dr. Tran studied her for a long moment, then signed something that the interpreter translated as, "I'll need to see your product roadmaps, talk to your development teams, review your current accessibility protocols. If what I find matches what you're promising, then we'll talk about board positions." "Fair enough," Evelyn agreed. "When can you start?" The answer had been immediately, Doctor. Tran spent 2 weeks embedded in Crosstech's offices, interviewing engineers, reviewing code, testing products with a critical eye that made several development teams squirm. But at the end of those 2 weeks, she'd come back to Evelyn with a report that was both damning and hopeful. "Your current products are mediocre at best from an accessibility standpoint," Dr. Tran had said bluntly during her exit interview. "But your teams are genuinely interested in learning. They're not defensive when I point out problems. They ask good questions. With proper training and the right framework, they could build something genuinely innovative. So you'll join the board on 3 conditions. First, I want budget authority for accessibility initiatives, not subject to approval from board members who think it's a waste of money. Second, I want Crosstech to hire at least 5 deaf or hard of hearing engineers within the next 6 months, not in some separate accessibility department, but integrated into core product teams. Third, I want your daughter to come speak to the company." The third condition had surprised Evelyn. Luna, she's 8 years old. She's 8 years old and she understood how to create tactical advantages in a life-threatening situation. That's the kind of thinking your engineers need to see. How people who navigate the world differently develop different problem-solving approaches. Dr. Tran had smiled slightly. "Besides, if you're serious about building accessibility into your culture, Starting with the CEO's daughter, showing she's not something to be hidden away, sends a powerful message. Evelyn had needed to think about that one. Luna had already been thrust into the spotlight more than any child should be. The media attention had been intense and sometimes invasive. Reporters trying to get photos. Other parents either treating Luna like an inspiration porn curiosity or avoiding play dates because they were uncomfortable with her deafness. But when Evelyn had asked Luna about it, sitting at their kitchen table during one of their morning sign language practices, spelling out the question carefully because she didn't yet know all the signs for abstract concepts, Luna had surprised her. "I want to do it," Luna had said, her hands and voice working together. "I want people to know that being deaf is okay, that I'm not broken or sad, that I'm just me." So 3 months after Christmas Eve, Evelyn stood at the front of Crosstech's largest conference room with her daughter beside her, facing 200 employees who'd gathered for an all-hands meeting about the company's new direction. Dr. Tran sat in the front row, having officially joined the board 2 weeks earlier. Caleb sat near the back with Noah, having agreed to serve as Crosstech's Director of Accessibility Initiatives, a position that paid considerably more than building maintenance and made full use of his background in both technology and intelligence work. "Most of you know what happened on Christmas Eve," Evelyn began, her voice steady, even though her heart was racing. This was different from a product launch or investor pitch. This was personal in a way she'd never been with employees before. "You know that our company was targeted by people who saw its value only in terms of what they could extract and sell. You know that our own board members participated in that conspiracy." The room was silent, people watching with the kind of attention that came from genuine investment in the outcome. These were Crosstech employees, the ones who'd stayed through the scandal, who'd kept building and innovating even when the company's future was uncertain. What you might not know is that the person who helped save lives that night, who created opportunities for law enforcement to intervene, wasn't a security professional or an FBI agent. It was my 8-year-old daughter. Evelyn's hand found Luna's shoulder. "Luna, do you want to tell them what you did?" Luna stepped forward, and Evelyn saw her daughter take a breath, gathering courage the way she'd seen Luna do before any challenging situation. Then Luna began to sign and speak simultaneously, telling the story of how she'd recognized the guard's uncertainty, how she'd worked with Noah to create a false medical emergency, how she'd understood that information was a weapon even when you had no physical power. The employees listened raptly. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Many were seeing sign language used in this setting for the first time, watching how Luna's hands created meaning that was as clear and precise as any spoken word. When Luna finished, she looked up at her mother uncertainly, as if worried she'd said too much or not enough. Evelyn squeezed her shoulder and signed "perfect" before turning back to the employees. "Luna taught me something that night," Evelyn continued. "She taught me that my greatest weakness as a CEO wasn't the board conspiracy or the security breach or any of the corporate failures we've been analyzing for months. My greatest weakness was that I'd spent 8 years treating my daughter's deafness as something to accommodate rather than something to learn from." She paused, making sure she had everyone's attention. "I built a technology company while being unable to communicate with my own daughter in her native language. I talked about innovation while ignoring the innovative ways deaf people navigate a world that wasn't designed for them. I claimed to value diverse perspectives while surrounding myself with people who all thought exactly like me." Dr. Tran was nodding as the front row. Caleb had a small smile on his face. Luna was watching her mother with an expression that was part pride, part hope. "That changes today," Evelyn said firmly. Crosstech is going to become a company that doesn't just talk about accessibility, but embeds it into everything we do. Every product, every feature, every design decision will include input from people with different abilities, different perspectives, different ways of experiencing technology. Not because it's good PR or because regulations require it, but because it makes us better at what we do. She outlined the specific initiatives they were launching: mandatory accessibility training for all employees, partnerships with deaf universities and schools to build a talent pipeline, design reviews that included disabled users from the earliest stages, a commitment to hiring at least 20% of their workforce from underrepresented disability communities within 2 years. "Some of you are probably thinking this sounds expensive," Evelyn acknowledged, "that focusing on a minority of users will slow down development or complicate our roadmaps. But I'm going to challenge that thinking. The features that make our products accessible to deaf users also make them better for people in noisy environments, for people who prefer visual interfaces, for people who multitask. The approaches that work for wheelchair users also improve navigation for people with strollers or luggage. Universal design isn't a burden, it's an opportunity. The questions that followed were thoughtful, engaged, occasionally skeptical in the way that engineers are skeptical of anything that sounds too idealistic. But Evelyn answered them honestly, acknowledging when she didn't have all the solutions, bringing in Dr. Tran and Caleb to provide technical details she couldn't yet speak to with authority. And through all of it, Luna stood beside her mother, sometimes signing responses when the questions were directed at her, sometimes just being present as living proof that different didn't mean less. After the all-hands meeting ended, after most employees had returned to their desks or left for the day, a young woman approached Evelyn hesitantly. She looked to be in her mid-20s, dressed in the kind of jeans and tech company t-shirt that marked her as an engineer. "Ms. Cross, I'm Amy Chen. I work in the AI development group." She paused, her hands moving in signs that Evelyn was now learning to recognize as ASL rather than nervous gesture. "I'm deaf. I've been at Crosstech for 18 months, and I've never told anyone because I was afraid it would affect my career. But after hearing you and Luna today," her voice caught slightly. "Thank you for making it feel like maybe I don't have to hide anymore." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "You shouldn't have had to hide in the first place. That's on me, on the culture I allowed to exist here. But if you're willing, I'd like to change that. I'd like your input on how we can make Crosstech a place where being deaf is just one more form of diversity we celebrate." Amy's smile was tentative but genuine. "I'd like that. And I'd like to meet Luna, if that's okay. I think I needed to see someone like me standing up here today. Even if she's 8 and I'm 26, I needed to see that." Luna, who'd been listening, stepped forward and signed something. Amy's face transformed, surprise giving way to delight as she responded in rapid ASL that Evelyn could only partially follow. The two of them had a quick exchange, hands flying, faces animated in a way that made it clear this was a language that belonged to them in ways English never quite could. When Amy left, promising to send Evelyn her thoughts on accessibility improvements, Luna looked up at her mother with an expression of wonder. "There are other deaf people who work here? I didn't know that." "I didn't either," Evelyn admitted, "which is exactly the problem we're going to fix." Over the following months, Crosstech transformed in ways both visible and subtle. The changes weren't always smooth. There were growing pains as teams learned to incorporate accessibility testing, frustrations when launch dates had to be pushed back to accommodate better design, skepticism from investors who worried about short-term costs versus long-term benefits. But there were victories too. The hire of their 20th deaf employee in month 7, exceeding the target they'd set for year 2. The launch of a new AI interface that used visual and haptic feedback so effectively that hearing users started choosing it over voice commands. The thank you letters from parents of deaf children who'd never seen a major tech company take accessibility seriously. And there were personal victories that mattered more than any corporate metric. The day Evelyn successfully interpreted a full conversation between Luna and Noah without needing a translator. The afternoon when Luna came home from school, excited to tell her mother about her day. And for the first time, they had that conversation entirely in sign language, not because English wasn't available, but because Luna had chosen her native language and knew her mother could now understand it. The evening when Caleb joined them for dinner and mentioned, almost casually, that Noah had told him Luna was his best friend. That having someone who spoke his language, who understood what it was like to navigate a hearing world while deaf, made school feel less lonely. Patricia Morrison was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for her role in the conspiracy. Jennifer Cho received 12 years after prosecutors successfully argued she'd been the primary architect of the entire scheme. Richard Blackwood got 3 years and a lifetime ban from serving on any corporate board, his testimony against the larger criminal network buying him some leniency, but not redemption. David Chen remained on Crosstech's board, having proven through his actions, support for accessibility initiatives, advocacy with other investors, genuine efforts to make amends, that his earlier failure had been weakness rather than malice. Evelyn still didn't fully trust him, but she'd learned that trust was something earned over time through consistent choices, not granted all at once. Marcus Webb gradually accepted that Crosstech under Evelyn's leadership was going to be a different kind of company than he'd initially invested in. Quarterly earnings mattered less than sustainable growth. Short-term stock price fluctuations were less important than building products that genuinely improved people's lives. It wasn't the Silicon Valley playbook he was accustomed to, but it was working, slowly, steadily, proving that another approach was possible. 7 months after Christmas Eve, Evelyn sat in her office late one evening, reviewing the final reports before Crosstech's board meeting the next day. The numbers were solid. Not spectacular, but healthy. Revenue was up 12% year over year. Employee retention had improved dramatically since the leadership changes. Customer satisfaction scores were the highest they'd been in 3 years. But more than the numbers, there was a sense that the company had found its purpose again, that they were building something worth building, not just chasing the next funding round or exit opportunity. A knock on her door pulled Evelyn from her thoughts. She looked up to find Luna standing in the doorway, still wearing the private school uniform that Evelyn had switched her to after the media attention made her previous school untenable. Luna's backpack was covered with pins and patches, including several that marked her identity as proudly deaf rather than something to downplay. "I thought you were doing homework with Noah," Evelyn signed, her hands now moving with a fluency that would have been impossible 6 months ago. "We finished," Luna signed back. "He went home with his dad. Can I ask you something?" "Always." Luna came into the office and climbed into the chair across from Evelyn's desk, the same chair where high-powered investors usually sat for meetings about millions of dollars. But Evelyn's daughter looked completely comfortable there, as if she belonged in her mother's professional world in ways she'd never been allowed before. "Amy said that Crosstech might create a program for deaf kids who want to learn about technology," Luna signed. "Like a summer camp or after-school thing. Is that true?" "It's in the planning stages," Evelyn confirmed. "Why? Are you interested?" "Maybe, but I was thinking..." Luna paused, searching for the right words or signs. "What if it wasn't just for deaf kids? What if it was mixed? Deaf kids and hearing kids learning together, with everything taught in both ASL and English, so that hearing kids could learn what it's like for us, and we could show them that being deaf doesn't mean we can't do everything they can do." Evelyn felt a surge of pride so strong it was almost painful. Her daughter, who'd spent 8 years learning to navigate a hearing world, was already thinking about how to make that world more inclusive for everyone, not just accommodating for deaf people. "I think that's a brilliant idea," Evelyn signed. "Would you want to help design it?" Luna's face lit up. "Really? I could help?" "You understand better than any adult what deaf kids need because you are one. And you've been teaching me for months that the best accessibility solutions come from listening to people with lived experience, not making assumptions about what they need." Evelyn smiled. "So yes, really, you can help design it." They spent the next half hour talking about Luna's vision for the program, how it should be structured, what activities would be most engaging, how to make sure deaf and hearing kids were truly learning from each other rather than the hearing kids just observing. Luna's ideas were thoughtful and practical, showing a maturity beyond her 8 years, but also maintaining the creativity and enthusiasm of childhood. When they finally packed up to head home, the city lights glowing through the office windows, Luna signed one more thing. "Mom, I'm proud of you. For learning my language, for changing the company, for being brave enough to admit you were wrong and then fix it." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes for what felt like the 1,000th time since Christmas Eve. "I'm proud of you too, sweetheart, for being patient with me while I figured things out, for being so much braver than I ever was." They took the elevator down to the parking garage where Evelyn's driver waited. Security protocols were still in place even months later, though they felt less like constraints and more like reasonable precautions. As they drove through Manhattan toward their apartment, Luna signed about her day, about Noah's latest project, about a book she was reading for school. And Evelyn understood every word. Not just the literal signs, but the subtext, the emotions, the full richness of her daughter's thoughts expressed in the language that had always been her first and most natural way of communicating. The apartment was quiet when they arrived, the kind of peaceful quiet that came from two people who were comfortable in each other's presence. They made dinner together, Luna helping in ways she never had before, now that they could actually have conversations while cooking, rather than Evelyn barking instructions that Luna had to lip read while watching pots and cutting boards. After dinner, as they were cleaning up, Luna's phone buzzed with a video call. She glanced at it, then signed to Evelyn. "It's Noah. Can we use the computer so you can see the call too?" They settled on the couch with Evelyn's laptop, and soon Noah's face filled the screen, signing enthusiastically about something that had happened in his science class. Luna responded with equal animation, and Evelyn watched the conversation flow between them, two children who'd survived something terrible together and found friendship that transcended the trauma. Caleb appeared behind Noah briefly, waving hello to Evelyn before disappearing again to give the kids privacy. But that small moment, that casual acknowledgement, felt significant. In the months since Christmas Eve, Caleb had become part of their lives in ways that extended beyond his professional role at Crosstech. He'd been the one to recommend Luna's new school, which had a robust deaf education program. He'd been the one Luna called when she had questions about sign language that were too complex for Evelyn's still developing skills. He'd been the one Evelyn found herself texting late at night when insomnia kept her up worrying about whether she was doing enough, changing fast enough, being the mother Luna deserved. And lately, those late-night texts had evolved into conversations that had nothing to do with sign language or accessibility or anything work-related. Conversations about life, about single parenting, about the peculiar isolation that came from having to be strong for your child while having no one to be vulnerable with yourself. Evelyn wasn't sure what those conversations meant yet, wasn't ready to put labels on whatever was developing between her and Caleb, but she knew that for the first time in years, she felt less alone in the work of rebuilding her life. When Luna ended the video call and started getting ready for bed, Evelyn found herself texting Caleb, "Thank you for everything, for saving Luna's life, for teaching me her language, for showing me what I'd been missing." His response came quickly. "You did the hard work yourself. I just pointed you in the right direction." "That's not true, and you know it." "Okay, fine. But you're welcome." For what it's worth, watching you learn ASL has been inspiring. Not many people are willing to be that vulnerable, to look foolish while they're learning something difficult. "I've looked foolish a lot," Evelyn typed back, smiling at the memory of her early attempts at signing when she'd accidentally told Luna she wanted to eat a library instead of read a book. "But you kept trying. That's what matters." They exchanged a few more messages before Evelyn heard Luna call for her from the bedroom. She found her daughter already under the covers, a book in sign language propped on her lap, one of the many they'd ordered to help Evelyn improve her vocabulary. "Will you read to me?" Luna signed. "In ASL? You're getting good enough now." It was exactly the kind of request that would have panicked Evelyn 6 months ago. Reading aloud was one thing. Reading in a language she'd only been learning for a few months was quite another. But she'd learned that Luna was more patient with her mistakes than she was with herself. That trying imperfectly was better than not trying at all. So Evelyn settled on the edge of Luna's bed and began to sign the story, her hands forming words and concepts while Luna watched with an expression of pure contentment. When Evelyn stumbled over a sign or couldn't remember how to express something complex, Luna would gently correct her, and they'd practice the phrase together until Evelyn got it right. By the time the story ended, Luna's eyes were heavy with sleep. Evelyn kissed her daughter's forehead and signed, "I love you," one of the first phrases she'd learned and still one of the most important. Luna signed it back, then added with a sleepy smile, "You're going to be okay, Mom." "We both are." And watching her daughter drift off to sleep, safe, loved, understood, Evelyn believed it. The company would recover. The scandal would fade into history. The board would stabilize with new members who actually understood what Crosstech was meant to be. But none of that mattered as much as this. Her daughter falling asleep knowing her mother could finally hear her, even in silence. Evelyn turned off the light and walked back to her own room, where her phone showed another message from Caleb. "Noah just told me that Luna is the bravest person he knows. I think he might be right." She learned it from necessity, Evelyn typed back, from having to navigate a world that wasn't built for her. Maybe, but she also learned it from watching her mother rebuild an entire company because she refused to accept that good enough was actually good enough. You're braver than you give yourself credit for. Evelyn sat on her bed, staring at those words, feeling something shift in her chest. For so long, she'd defined courage as never showing weakness, never admitting fear, never letting anyone see that she didn't have all the answers. But Christmas Eve had shattered that definition, had shown her that real courage looked more like vulnerability, like asking for help, like admitting failure, like being willing to start over from scratch when you realized you'd been doing something fundamentally wrong. She typed one more message to Caleb. Coffee sometime? Just us. No kids, no work talk. I'd like to say thank you properly. The 3 dots indicating he was typing appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, I'd like that. Tomorrow? Tomorrow, Evelyn confirmed. She put her phone down and looked around her bedroom, tastefully decorated, perfectly organized, as impersonal as a hotel room despite having lived here for 3 years. Maybe it was time to change that too. Time to make this place feel like a home, where Luna could put up her artwork without worrying about ruining the aesthetic, where friends could come over without everything needing to be perfect first. Time to stop treating her life like a corporate presentation that needed to impress investors and start treating it like something messy and real and worth fully inhabiting. The next morning, Evelyn and Luna had their usual sign language practice over breakfast, but this time Luna taught her mother the signs for hope, future, and together, 3 concepts that felt appropriate for where they were heading. Then Evelyn dropped Luna at school, watching her daughter run toward Noah with the kind of unself-conscious joy that came from having a friend who truly understood you. The Crosstech board meeting went better than expected. Dr. Tran presented data showing that their accessibility initiatives were already starting to differentiate them in the market, attracting customers who'd never considered their products before. Marcus acknowledged that the approach was working, even if it wasn't what he'd originally envisioned. David made a formal motion to allocate additional resources to the deaf youth program Luna had proposed, and it passed unanimously. And when Evelyn left the office that evening to meet Caleb at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, she felt lighter than she had in years. Not because everything was perfect. Crosstech still had challenges to navigate, and parenting Luna through the aftermath of trauma was an ongoing process that required patience and professional support. But because she was finally moving in the right direction, finally building something sustainable, rather than just fighting fires and pretending everything was under control. Caleb was already at the cafe when she arrived, 2 cups of coffee on the table and an expression that suggested he was as nervous as she was about this meeting. They sat across from each other, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, just shared that peculiar awareness that comes when you realize a relationship is shifting from one category into another. So, Caleb said finally, no kids, no work talk. What does that leave us? Evelyn smiled. Us, I suppose. Who we are when we're not being CEO or accessibility director or parents. Just 2 people who met on the worst night of our lives and somehow ended up here. Sounds like the beginning of a complicated story, Caleb observed. Most good stories are complicated, Evelyn countered. The simple ones usually aren't worth telling. They talked for 2 hours, about Caleb's past with the NSA and why he'd chosen to disappear, about Evelyn's journey from coding in her apartment to running a billion-dollar company, about the peculiar challenges of single parenting and the way trauma could either break families apart or forge them into something stronger. They talked about Luna and Noah and the friendship between 2 kids who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to be light for one another. And somewhere in that conversation, as winter afternoon faded into evening and the cafe began to fill with people coming in from the cold, Evelyn realized she was happy. Not the shallow happiness that came from closing a good deal or seeing positive earnings reports, but the deep contentment that came from being exactly where she was supposed to be, with someone who understood both her strengths and her failures. I don't know where this goes, Evelyn admitted as they were leaving. I don't have a strategic plan for whatever this is. Good, Caleb said, because the best things in life don't follow strategic plans. They just unfold, one honest conversation at a time. They walked out into the January cold together, and Evelyn felt the future opening up in ways she hadn't imagined possible 7 months ago. Crosstech would continue evolving into the kind of company she'd always wanted to build. Luna would grow up knowing her mother truly saw her, truly spoke her language, truly valued who she was. And maybe, just maybe, Evelyn would learn that success wasn't about never needing help, but about having the courage to accept it when it was offered. 3 months later, on a mild April afternoon, Crosstech hosted its first youth technology camp. 30 kids, half deaf, half hearing, filled the conference rooms and labs with the kind of chaotic energy that comes from young people excited to learn. Luna and Noah served as junior counselors, helping younger kids navigate the mix of ASL and spoken English, demonstrating that communication was possible across any divide if people were willing to make the effort. Evelyn watched from the back of the room as her daughter taught a group of hearing 7-year-olds how to introduce themselves in sign language, her patience infinite, her joy evident. This was the child who'd been so quiet and careful at that Christmas Eve dinner, trying to make herself invisible so her mother could focus on business. Now she was confident, visible, claiming space in a world that was finally learning to make room for her. Amy Chen stood beside Evelyn, watching the same scene. "You know what the best part of this is?" Amy signed. "These hearing kids are going to grow up thinking of sign language as normal, as just another way people communicate. They won't have the prejudices their parents had because they learned different from the beginning." "That's the hope," Evelyn agreed, her signing now fluent enough for complex conversations. "That we can raise a generation that doesn't see different as less, that understands accessibility as creativity, not constraint." "You really have changed," Amy observed. "When I started here, I never imagined Crosstech would become this, a place where being deaf is celebrated, not hidden." "I'm still learning," Evelyn said honestly, "still making mistakes, still discovering blind spots I didn't know I had. But I'm committed to the work, to listening to people like you and learning what I don't know." The camp ran for 2 weeks, and by the end, the hearing kids were signing entire conversations, and the deaf kids were teaching their parents signs they'd learned. Several families reached out to ask about continuing the program year-round. A few parents mentioned that their hearing children had started asking why their schools didn't teach sign language alongside Spanish and French. Small changes spreading outward like ripples on water. Not revolutionary, perhaps, but meaningful in their cumulative effect. On the last day of camp, as families gathered for a closing ceremony where the kids would present their final projects, Evelyn found herself standing with Caleb at the edge of the crowd. Over the past 3 months, their coffee meetings had evolved into regular dinners, then weekend activities with Luna and Noah, then the kind of comfortable domesticity that suggested something more permanent was developing. "Noah asked me something yesterday," Caleb said quietly, signing as he spoke so Evelyn could follow both. "He wanted to know if we were going to be a family. You, me, him, Luna." Evelyn's breath caught. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that family is something people choose, not just something that happens by biology, and that if Luna and you wanted to choose us, and if we wanted to choose you, then yes, we could be a family." Caleb met her eyes. "But I said it was a conversation all 4 of us needed to have together, when everyone was ready." "And are you ready?" Evelyn asked. "I think so. Noah's been more stable these past few months than he's been since we went into hiding. Having Luna in his life, having a community that understands him, it's given him something I couldn't provide alone." Caleb paused. "And having you in my life has reminded me that hiding from the world isn't the same as protecting my son. That maybe we can build something better by staying and fighting for it rather than running." Evelyn looked across the crowd to where Luna and Noah stood together, preparing to present their joint project about accessible gaming interfaces. Her daughter caught her eye and signed a question. "Are you watching?" Evelyn signed back. "Always." And in that moment, she understood that family wasn't about having all the answers, or being perfect, or never making mistakes. It was about showing up, about trying, about being willing to learn and change and grow, even when it was hard and uncomfortable and forced you to confront everything you'd been doing wrong. She turned back to Caleb. "Let's have that conversation, all 4 of us. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. Because yes, I think I'd like to choose you. Choose us. Choose this complicated, imperfect, beautiful thing we're building." Caleb smiled, the kind of real, unguarded smile she'd learned to recognize as his truth. "Soon," he agreed, "when we're ready." They stood together as Luna and Noah presented their project, explaining how they designed a gaming system that used haptic feedback and visual cues so that deaf and hearing players could compete on equal footing. The other kids applauded, some clapping, some using the ASL sign for applause that looked like jazz hands, all of them celebrating together in a language that transcended sound. And Evelyn felt, for the first time since that Christmas Eve when her world had fallen apart, that she'd found solid ground. Not because everything was solved or perfect, but because she'd finally learned the most important lesson of all, that strength wasn't about never falling down. It was about having the courage to get back up and ask for help when you needed it. That listening was more powerful than speaking, that her daughter's silence had been speaking all along. She just needed to learn the language to hear it. 6 months later, on a cool October evening, Evelyn stood in front of the Crosstech leadership team and announced her decision to step back from daily operations. Not step down, that distinction was important, but create space for new leadership while she focused on strategy, accessibility initiatives, and the parts of the business that aligned with her strengths. I've learned something important over the past year, she told the assembled executives. I learned that I can't be everything to everyone. I can't be the CEO who works 80-hour weeks and the mother my daughter needs, and the partner I want to be, and the advocate for accessibility that this company requires. Something has to give. She looked at Dr. Tran, who'd agreed to take on the role of COO, not as a way to diminish Evelyn's authority, but as a partnership that would let both women focus on what they did best. So I'm choosing to give up the illusion of total control. I'm choosing to trust my team, to delegate effectively, to build a company that doesn't depend on any single person being perfect. The executives listened with varying expressions, some supportive, some uncertain, all of them aware that this represented a fundamental shift in how Crosstech would operate. But Evelyn had learned that the right decision wasn't always the comfortable one, and that sometimes leadership meant knowing when to share power rather than hoarding it. That evening, she went home to the apartment she and Luna still lived in, though plans were in motion to find a new place that could accommodate the blended family they were becoming. Caleb and Noah were coming for dinner, as they did 3 or 4 times a week now. Sometimes they cooked together, sometimes they ordered in, sometimes they just sat around talking and signing and being present with each other. Luna was setting the table when Evelyn arrived, a task she'd taken on as her responsibility, arranging plates and silverware with the same care she brought to everything. Noah was helping Caleb in the kitchen, both of them signing to each other about proper pasta cooking techniques with the kind of passionate intensity that suggested this was a debate they'd had before. "Mom," Luna called out when she heard the door. "Noah says you put oil in pasta water, but I told him you don't because it makes the sauce not stick as well. Tell him I'm right." It was such a normal moment, such an ordinary family argument about cooking techniques, that Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not perfection, but presence. Not control, but connection. "You're both right in different ways," Evelyn said diplomatically, then signed it for Noah's benefit. Oil keeps pasta from sticking, but Luna's right that it can affect sauce adherence. It depends on what you're making. The debate continued through dinner, branching into other topics. What movie they should watch later, whether cats or dogs made better pets, whether pineapple belonged on pizza. The kind of meandering conversation that happens when people are comfortable together, when no one is performing or trying to impress anyone else. After dinner, after the movie, after Luna and Noah had fallen asleep on the couch, with the particular bonelessness of children who feel safe enough to truly relax, Evelyn and Caleb sat in the kitchen with cups of tea and the comfortable silence of people who'd learned they didn't need to fill every moment with words. "I told the board today that I'm stepping back from daily operations," Evelyn said finally, creating space for better work-life balance. How did they take it? Better than expected. I think they've realized that a CEO who's present and focused is more valuable than one who's spread too thin trying to control everything. Evelyn smiled slightly. Amazing what difference a year makes. "A year ago tonight, you were preparing for that Christmas Eve dinner," Caleb observed, thinking it was just another business meeting you needed to survive. And instead it turned into the night that changed everything. Evelyn looked toward the living room where their children slept. "I don't recommend the method, but I can't argue with the results." "Would you go back?" Caleb asked. "If you could go back to that day, knowing what you know now but able to avoid the trauma? Would you? It was a harder question than it should have been. The trauma had been real. The danger had been genuine. Luna and Noah had experienced things no children should have to endure. But that night had also broken through walls Evelyn had spent years building, had forced her to confront truths she'd been avoiding, had ultimately led to this kitchen, this conversation, this life she was building. No, she said finally. I wouldn't go back. Because going back would mean Luna and I might have continued the way we were. Me never learning her language, both of us just accommodating rather than truly connecting. It would mean Crosstech might have stayed on the path we were on, prioritizing growth over values, profit over purpose. And it would mean I might never have met you, never understood that asking for help isn't weakness. She reached across the table and took Caleb's hand. So no, I wouldn't go back. I'd rather be here, with these scars, building this future. Caleb squeezed her hand gently. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here too. They sat together as the night deepened. Two people who'd found each other in crisis and chosen to stay through the healing. The road ahead would have challenges. Blending families always did, and running a major tech company while maintaining work-life balance would require constant attention and adjustment. But they'd face those challenges together, with the hard-won wisdom that came from having survived the worst, and discovered they were stronger than they'd known. In the living room, Luna shifted in her sleep, her hands moving in signs even while unconscious, dreaming in the language that had always been hers, secure in the knowledge that her mother could finally understand it. And Evelyn, watching her daughter through the doorway, felt a peace she'd never experienced before. Not the peace of having arrived at some destination, but the peace of finally being on the right path, of knowing that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone, that she'd built something worth having, not just a company, but a family, not just success, but meaning. The city lights glowed through the windows, and somewhere out there, the world continued turning. But here, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Imperfect, complicated, real, and utterly worth fighting for. And that, Evelyn thought as she finished her tea and prepared to carry Luna to bed, was the truest kind of success there was.